Hey friends, tonight we drift into the world of ancient Greece, where gods were not only patrons of grand temples and dramatic tragedies, but sometimes the snacks you might nibble while watching those plays. Our journey begins with Dionysus, a god of wine, revelry, and the stage itself, who somehow found his name attached not just to wild festivals, but also to the quiet details of theatre-going life. As always, this space is meant to help you relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off to sleep while learning a little along the way. If you enjoy this kind of slow history, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly want more of these cozy journeys through the past. I'd also love to know where in the world you're listening from, and what time of night or day it is for you. It's always a delight to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, settle into your bed, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, and let's ease into the quiet, winding story of Dionysus and his unexpected role as the god of theatre snacks. When you think of ancient Greece, you might imagine white marble temples glowing in the sun, or philosophers debating endlessly in the agora. But for many ordinary Greeks, the most memorable events of the year were the festivals. These were times when whole cities came alive with music, parades, religious rituals, and of course theatre. At the heart of these gatherings was Dionysus, a god unlike any other in the Greek pantheon. He was not only the god of wine and revelry, but also the patron of drama, the one presiding over comedies and tragedies alike. Yet, in a curious twist, his patronage extended to something much smaller, quieter, and, perhaps, cozier. The snacks people munched while watching the long performances staged in his honor. To begin understanding why this came about, we have to first picture what a theatre festival in ancient Athens might have looked like. Imagine yourself stepping into the theatre of Dionysus, nestled at the foot of the Acropolis. It is early morning, perhaps springtime during the city Dionysia, one of the most important festivals held in his honor. Thousands of Athenians and visitors from other states gather, filling the semicircular rows of stone seats that climb up the hillside. The sun is rising, and a faint smell of roasted barley cakes and figs drifts through the crowd. Performances at these festivals could last all day, several tragedies presented one after another, followed by satyr plays or comedies. So naturally, food was a necessity. The Greeks never approached eating casually, even at the theatre. To them, food was always tied to ritual. Dionysus himself was a god of transformation, of grapes into wine, of ordinary gatherings into festivals, of raw energy into artistic performance. In a similar way, the simple foods eaten at the theatre, nuts, breads, dried fruits, sometimes even a little cheese or diluted wine, were not only sustenance but symbols of participation. To eat while watching was not just a matter of filling one's stomach, it was a way of being part of the ritual, of sharing in Dionysus's gifts. But let us step back and consider Dionysus himself. He was a somewhat strange and unsettling figure among the Olympian gods. Unlike Zeus with his thunderbolts or Athena with her wisdom, Dionysus embodied contradiction. He was both joyful and dangerous, gentle and frenzied, a god of civilization, but also of wild nature. His myths often describe him arriving in a city with his followers, satyrs and maenads, bringing either blissful celebration or chaos, depending on whether he was honored properly. For this reason, Athenians took his festivals seriously, even though they were full of laughter and drunkenness. The theatre was his sacred space, and to honor him was to immerse oneself fully in performance, sound, and yes, even taste. Now imagine sitting in those stone seats for hours upon hours. The tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, or Euripides were not light entertainments, they were lengthy, complex, often exhausting experiences. The audience might weep at a chorus describing the fall of Troy, or sit in silence as Oedipus realized the truth of his fate. Between plays, there were breaks, but the crowds remained, buzzing with conversation. This was when food appeared, small parcels carried in cloths, bread broken and passed along rows, figs chewed slowly to keep energy up. The connection to Dionysus seems almost accidental at first. People needed to eat, and since it was his festival, food was naturally associated with him. But if we look closer, we find deeper meaning. In Greek ritual thought, eating was a way of binding a community. To share food at a sacred event was to bind yourself not only to your neighbors, but also to the god presiding over the occasion. The theatre snacks, humble though they were, became an offering in their own right, not placed on an altar but consumed together, in his presence. Let us also consider the symbolism of the foods themselves. Grapes, of course, belonged to Dionysus, and even when dried into raisins or baked into cakes, they carried his signature. Barley, the staple grain, was considered sacred in many rituals. It was often sprinkled on sacrificial animals, and here it found its way into the audience's hands as simple barley cakes. Figs, too, had a special place in Greek ritual life, symbolizing fertility and abundance. To eat these while watching a play dedicated to Dionysus was to consume his world in miniature sweetness, sustenance, and the promise of transformation. But perhaps the most telling detail is the way the Greeks did not separate art from life. For us today, going to a theatre performance might involve silence, formality, and perhaps only a drink or snack before or after. But for the Greeks, theatre was both sacred and social. People talked during the performances, reacted aloud, cheered, hissed, and sometimes argued. Eating was part of this atmosphere. Dionysus's theatre was not about quiet contemplation. It was about immersion, being swept up in collective experience. Snacks were not a distraction but a participation in the mood of the god himself. Still, there is something curious here. Why would a god associated with wine and ecstatic celebration care about the more mundane aspects of watching plays? About figs tucked into one's pouch, or barley bread chewed during a choral ode? Wasn't Dionysus about grandeur, intoxication, and divine madness, rather than small bites of food? To answer that, we must look deeper into how the Greeks thought about the balance between frenzy and calm, excess and moderation. Dionysus was indeed the god of ecstasy, but he was also the god who blurred boundaries. He transformed not only through wildness but through subtle changes. Grapes into wine, wheat into bread, silence into song. Snacks at the theatre represented this quieter form of transformation. They turned long hours of sitting into something sustainable, turned hunger into community, and reminded the audience that even the simplest acts could fall under the gaze of the gods. And so, we see the beginnings of Dionysus as the patron not just of grand performances, but of the very ordinary act of eating while watching. In the small movements of breaking bread, passing figs, or sipping diluted wine, he was present. But how exactly did this association become formalized? Was it truly a matter of divine symbolism? Or was it more about the practical needs of Athenian society and their ways of blending ritual with everyday life? To understand why Dionysus became linked with something as small and ordinary as theatre snacks, we have to explore the larger framework of the Greek festival calendar. Theatre in ancient Athens was never just a matter of entertainment, it was inseparable from religion. Each performance was itself a ritual act, dedicated to the god, performed in his sacred space, and shaped by traditions that blurred the line between art and worship. Let us return to the city Dionysia, the grandest of the festivals in his honor. This event, held every spring, lasted several days, and included processions, sacrifices, and competitions in tragedy and comedy. The entire city participated, citizens, foreigners, slaves, and even visiting dignitaries. Before the plays began, a grand procession escorted a wooden statue of Dionysus into the theatre, symbolizing his presence among the people. Offerings were made, sacrifices performed, and libations poured. Then, the plays could begin. But as anyone who has attended a long ceremony knows, ritual can be exhausting. Imagine the rows of citizens, beginning their day before dawn, walking in crowds to the theatre, sitting under the bright sun, their attention demanded by hours of song, dance, and dialogue. Food was not an afterthought, it was essential. And here Dionysus's role as a god of sustenance, not just intoxication, became clear. He was the one who sustained the body, while the spirit was immersed in story. The Greeks were not shy about combining the sacred and the mundane. To us, eating during a religious festival might seem distracting or even irreverent. For them, it was part of the ritual cycle. In Homeric hymns and countless myths, the gods themselves were depicted dining, feasting on ambrosia, drinking nectar. To eat in Dionysus's theatre was to mirror divine behavior, to join in a shared meal that, though humble, echoed the eternal banquets of Olympus. The foods chosen carried symbolic meaning. Barley, for instance, was not only the staple grain of Greece, but also the ritual grain of initiation. In the Eleusinian Mysteries, another sacred festival, barley, water known as kykion, was drunk as part of the rites. By eating barley cakes in the theatre, audiences were linking themselves, perhaps unconsciously, to that same world of sacred nourishment. Figs, sweet and abundant, were considered gifts of fertility. Grapes, of course, belonged to Dionysus. Even nuts and olives carried ritual connotations, representing abundance, wisdom, and divine favor. There is also a practical angle that must not be overlooked. The theatre of Dionysus could hold as many as 15,000 to 17,000 spectators. That is the size of a modern sports stadium. Imagine the noise, the bustle, the heat of so many bodies gathered together. Food was a way to manage such a mass gathering. Sellers likely roamed the edges of the theatre, offering their wares, much like vendors at a sporting event today. Some scholars even suggest that certain foods were associated so closely with the festival that they became traditional theatre foods, much as popcorn is today with cinemas. But unlike modern snacks, these foods were inseparable from the god's symbolism. To chew on a fig was not only to keep your stomach settled, it was to acknowledge Dionysus's bounty. To sip diluted wine was to partake directly in his essence, for he was, in a sense, the wine itself. Thus, the act of snacking blurred into an act of worship. Now consider the plays themselves. Greek tragedy often dealt with themes of suffering, fate, and mortality. They were emotionally heavy, requiring focus and resilience from the audience. Comedy, though lighter, was often satirical and biting, aimed at politicians and cultural habits. Watching these back-to-back all day demanded stamina. The presence of food provided comfort, grounding, and a sense of balance. Dionysus, through his patronage of these snacks, became the god who allowed mortals to endure long hours of performance without collapsing from hunger or fatigue. Yet there is a further layer. In the myths of Dionysus, he often appears as a god who dissolves boundaries between joy and sorrow, madness and clarity, wildness and order. The snacks at the theatre reflected this same duality. They were at once ordinary and sacred, necessary and symbolic, practical and divine. Eating them blurred the line between mere sustenance and ritual offering. They reminded the audience that no part of life, not even chewing on bread during a tragedy, was outside the reach of the gods. Let us also not forget the social role of these snacks. In a theatre filled with thousands, food became a way of connecting. A man might share bread with the stranger beside him, or a family might pass figs down the row. This act of sharing echoed the communal meals of religious festivals and sacrifices. Dionysus, the god of community as much as ecstasy, presided over these small acts of generosity. In that way, theatre snacks were not private indulgences but public, shared rituals that reinforced the bonds of the city. Still, one might wonder if Dionysus was so deeply associated with wine, revelry, and transformation. How did this quieter aspect of him, the patron of snacks, gain recognition? Was it simply an extension of his broader role as god of sustenance and celebration? Or was there something unique about the theatre that made food particularly significant? Here lies the deeper mystery. Some scholars argue that the association arose not only from practice but from myth itself. Dionysus was often depicted carrying a thyrsus, a staff tipped with ivy or pine cone, symbols of fertility and abundance. His followers, the Maenads, were said to eat raw flesh in their frenzied rituals, an act of transformation through consumption. Could it be that the simple foods of the theatre were a tame, civilized echo of this mythic feasting? Instead of tearing raw meat in ecstatic ritual, Athenians chewed barley cakes and figs in calm, ordered rows, yet still under his gaze. This interpretation suggests something profound, that every act of eating in the theatre, no matter how small, was a reenactment of Dionysian myth, a bridge between wild ritual and civic order. But is this the full story? Or could there be yet another reason? One rooted not in myth or ritual, but in the everyday economics of Athens, the lives of vendors, farmers, and bakers who supplied these foods. We have already seen how Dionysus presided over the theatre as both a god of drama and of sustenance, blurring ritual with the ordinary act of eating. We have also explored the symbolism of the foods themselves, grapes, figs, barley, wine, and how they became quiet offerings during long days of performance. But there remains one more piece of the story, one that ties the lofty world of myth to the practical realities of ancient Athenian life. For while Dionysus was a god, he was also, curiously, a god who lived in the details. The hands of bakers, the baskets of farmers, the cries of vendors who sold food to the crowd. Let us imagine the scene again: the theatre at dawn, rows of citizens settling into their seats, children fidgeting, elders leaning on their canes. The plays were about to begin, but around the edges of the theatre, small figures moved quietly, selling their goods. Archaeologists and historians tell us little about these vendors, but we can piece together their presence from the logic of the festival. 17,000 people gathered in one place could not remain without food or drink for an entire day. Someone had to supply them, Most likely, farmers from the countryside brought their produce to the city for the festival: baskets of dried figs, sacks of barley cakes, jars of olives. Women, often excluded from the audience of tragedies but active in economic life, may have been among the sellers. Slaves or hired workers carried trays through the crowd. The theatre thus became not just a stage for performance but a marketplace of nourishment, a blending of art, ritual, and economy. Now, consider how deeply this reflected Dionysus's identity. He was a god who moved between worlds, between city and countryside, between order and chaos, between myth and daily life. His festivals were moments when rural farmers and urban citizens mingled, when boundaries collapsed. The snacks in the theatre symbolized this collapse too. The products of the land entering the sacred space of performance, ordinary food elevated into ritual meaning. The economics of the festival cannot be ignored. Athens thrived on trade. Its ports brought in grain from the Black Sea, wine from islands, figs and olives from the countryside. By consuming these goods in the theatre, Athenians reaffirmed the lifeblood of their city. Dionysus, then, was not only patron of performance, but of the entire network that sustained it: the fields, the trade routes, the bakers, the sellers. To eat in his theatre was to acknowledge the interdependence of city and land. But why snacks, and not meals? Here the symbolism becomes even clearer. The Greeks were deeply ritualistic about the act of dining. Full meals were taken in private homes, or at public feasts connected to sacrifices. To eat a meal in the theatre would have been inappropriate, even disruptive. Snacks, however, occupied a middle ground enough to sustain, but not enough to distract. They mirrored Dionysus himself: not quite meal, not quite fast, not quite sacred, not quite ordinary. Snacks existed in the same liminal space he embodied, neither here nor there, but always in between. This betweenness is crucial to understanding Dionysus's patronage. He was a god of thresholds, of blurred identities, of transformations that were never complete. Just as he blurred the line between madness and clarity, he blurred the line between eating and offering, between theatre and feast, between ritual and leisure. Every fig chewed in the theatre, every sip of watered wine, became part of his domain. Let us not forget the psychological dimension. The Greeks believed that theatre was a kind of collective therapy, a way to process emotions through the stories of gods and heroes. Aristotle later called this catharsis, the purging of pity and fear. But catharsis required endurance. Hours of sitting, watching, weeping, laughing. Without sustenance, the audience might grow restless or exhausted. Snacks were a quiet medicine, keeping bodies calm so minds could open to tragedy and comedy alike. Dionysus, god of transformation, thus became healer as well. Not only through ecstatic wine but through the humble nourishment that allowed theatre to work its magic. When we step back, we see how the pieces fit together. The snacks were not trivial, they were threads in the larger fabric of Dionysian worship. They connected farmers to city dwellers, sacred myth to daily survival, ritual symbolism to economic exchange. Dionysus's theatre was not a place apart from life but a mirror of it, where every detail, even food, carried meaning. And what became of this tradition? Did the association of food and performance vanish with the end of ancient Greece? In some ways, no. Think of our own theatres today. We buy popcorn at the cinema, candies at plays, drinks at concerts. We rarely think of this as sacred, but the echo is there. The blending of art and eating. The way food becomes part of experience. The Greeks may have given divine meaning to their snacks, but we still carry a faint trace of the same impulse, to make performance and sustenance inseparable. So perhaps Dionysus was not only the god of Greek theatregoers but of all of us who, even today, cannot watch without munching. He presides wherever art and food meet. In the amphitheatre, in the cinema, even in the living room where we stream stories while sipping something sweet. His domain continues quiet and unnoticed, in the details of everyday life. And yet one question remains. If Dionysus was present in every fig and barley cake, every sip of wine, then how far did his influence truly extend? Was he merely the god of performance and snacks, or was he, in some deeper sense, the god of all transformations that happen in the margins? The small, unremarkable acts that shape human experience far more than the grand moments we tend to remember. The life of Rome is often remembered in marble monuments, arches, and aqueducts. But if you step into the daily routine of a Roman, you will find that survival and comfort rested upon simpler things: the food on their plates and the rituals of their meals. To understand Rome, you must understand bread. Bread was the cornerstone of Roman life, not only for the poor but also for the rich. The simplest loaf, called panis, could be found in the hands of laborers and soldiers, while more elaborate versions, flavored with honey or cheese, appeared at the tables of senators. Rome had an entire system dedicated to ensuring that its citizens had access to this staple, through the annona, a grain dole that distributed wheat to the urban population. Imagine the daily sight-long queues of people, lined along dusty streets, collecting their share of grain that would later be ground at mills and baked into loaves that sustained the empire. It was not glorious, nor dramatic, but it was essential. Alongside bread came wine, a drink so embedded in Roman culture that it was consumed at nearly every meal. But wine was not drunk in the way many imagine today. It was rarely taken straight, rather, Romans mixed it with water, herbs or honey, creating blends that were as much about stretching supplies as they were about taste. Even soldiers on campaign carried diluted wine, partly to quench their thirst and partly to purify the water they drank. In Rome, wine was never about intoxication. It was about continuity, a flow of life as constant as the Tiber itself. Meals in ancient Rome followed a rhythm. The day began simply, often with a modest breakfast of bread dipped in wine, perhaps accompanied by cheese or figs. Lunch, or prandium, remained small, a light pause before the labors of the afternoon. But the evening meal, the cena, was where Roman dining culture revealed itself most fully. For the poor, it was still humble, a stew of lentils or barley porridge, but for the wealthy, it expanded into a long affair of multiple courses. Picture a triclinium, the Roman dining room. 3 couches arranged around a low table, men reclining on their left elbows while slaves moved quietly about, placing dishes before them. The wealthy might begin with eggs or olives, move on to roasted meats, and end with fruits, nuts, or sweet cakes. Yet what lingers in the mind is not the flavor of the food but the structure of the ritual, the way Romans reclined, the order of service, and the symbolic gestures of dining. These details, small and repetitive, shaped the culture of the empire as much as any military conquest. What is striking is how much of Roman dining was not about food itself, but about the performance of order and hierarchy. At banquets, seating arrangements carried meaning. The most honored guest lay closest to the host, others were placed according to rank or favor. Even the act of reclining, once a mark of privilege, gradually became a cultural expectation for all Roman men of means. Women, except in later centuries, rarely took part in these reclining feasts. These customs reinforced the rhythms of Roman society, where every action, even eating, reminded participants of their place in the greater structure. Beyond the homes of the elite, communal dining also held power. Festivals and religious ceremonies often included shared meals, binding the community together through bread, wine, and sacrifice. The meat of animals offered to the gods was often distributed to the people, transforming a religious act into a social event. In this way, the Roman table was more than sustenance, it was a theater of belonging, where individuals connected to family, neighbors, and even the divine. But beneath the grandeur of Roman banquets and the rituals of the elite lay the quiet endurance of the poor. For them, bread was sometimes coarse, dark, and barely enough. Wine might be little more than sour grape juice, stretched thin with water. Their cena was rarely more than vegetable stew or porridge. Yet even here, in the most ordinary meals, we find resilience. These humble foods kept Rome alive during times of famine, during sieges, and through the long stretches when empire meant little more than survival. As you picture these tables, some lined with silver and crystal, others with nothing more than clay bowls, you begin to see Rome not as marble ruins but as daily life, lived one meal at a time. And in that thought, a quiet question arises. If the empire was sustained as much by bread and wine as by soldiers and senators, then what does that say about the true foundation of Rome's strength? While private meals reflected the rhythms of daily life, the Roman state understood that food could also serve a purpose far beyond nourishment. For emperors and magistrates, grain, bread, and banquets became instruments of influence, tools to maintain order, secure loyalty, and display power. This practice would later be famously summed up in the phrase, panem et circenses, bread and circuses, a reminder that the empire could be kept stable if its citizens were fed and entertained. Public grain distributions, known as annona, were carefully managed. Ships laden with wheat arrived from Sicily, North Africa, and Egypt, supplying the capital with enough to feed hundreds of thousands. Officials oversaw the grinding of grain in public mills, the baking of loaves, and their distribution to citizens, who queued patiently along streets and piazzas. While this may sound mundane, every loaf represented a deliberate act of governance, a tangible connection between ruler and ruled. In essence, the emperor could be present in every bite of bread handed to the crowd, a silent reminder of power and generosity. Banquets and public feasts served a similar function. On certain festivals or commemorative occasions, large portions of food were set out in public spaces. Citizens gathered in rows or on benches, consuming stews, bread, and occasionally roasted meat. These meals were not about indulgence alone. They were highly organized performances of generosity and control, demonstrating the wealth and stability of the city while subtly reinforcing hierarchy. Those closer to the distributing magistrates might receive better portions or earlier service, a quiet reinforcement of social stratification. The connection between food and spectacle was amplified by entertainment. Gladiatorial games, chariot races, and theatrical performances were often paired with distributed meals. Citizens could watch the battles in the arena while enjoying portions of bread or fruit. Even in such public settings, Dionysian echoes of theatre lingered, eating, watching, and communal experience combined in ritualized fashion. Here the boundaries between necessity and celebration, mundane and divine, again blurred. The logistics behind these feasts were immense. Coordinating thousands of loaves, barrels of wine, and heaps of fruits required careful planning. Bakers, millers, porters, and administrators formed an invisible network that ensured nothing went to waste. Every citizen who left the public square with a meal was participating in a vast, organized system that depended on the collaboration of ordinary people, many of whom remained unnamed in history. Interestingly, emperors also understood that food could be symbolic, not just practical. During certain festivals, exotic delicacies or imported wines were presented to the populace. By offering rare ingredients, spices from the east, honey from distant provinces, or delicacies from Africa, rulers demonstrated both the reach of Rome and the favor of the gods, positioning themselves as caretakers of divine abundance. Even the timing of these feasts was deliberate, often coinciding with religious festivals to reinforce the association between political power and sacred ritual. But there was a darker side. The dependence of the population on grain distributions made the empire vulnerable. Crop failures, piracy, or political mismanagement could quickly turn a feast into a crisis. When bread ran low, unrest often followed. Emperor's generosity was therefore both a gift and a liability. It pacified citizens, but it required constant vigilance, careful accounting, and the continuous flow of resources from distant lands. Through all this, one can see that food was never truly ordinary in Rome. Even the simplest bread or porridge carried layers of meaning, sustenance, symbolism, politics, and ritual. Those public banquets connected citizens to rulers, linked the present to tradition, and ensured the city functioned smoothly. They also gave the people a sense of participation in something larger, even as they quietly reinforced the emperor's power. Yet, as impressive as these arrangements were, one cannot help but wonder, did the grandeur of these banquets mask deeper problems? Could an empire built on distributed grain and public spectacle survive the pressures of population growth, warfare, and political unrest indefinitely? The answer would not be apparent to the citizens enjoying their meals, who chewed quietly on bread, shared figs with neighbors, and sipped watered wine, while the world around them carried on with the ordinary difficulties of life. This lingering uncertainty is the key to understanding Rome's relationship with food. Banquets were not merely about indulgence, they were about survival, about sustaining an empire in both body and mind. And like the quiet rituals of theatre snacks for Dionysus, they remind us that even the simplest, most mundane acts, breaking bread, sharing food, enduring a long day of labor, can hold profound significance in human history. By now, the picture of Roman dining has expanded from private meals to public spectacles, revealing how food could shape not only daily life, but the entire social fabric of an empire. While bread and wine sustained the population physically, the orchestrated public banquets did so socially and politically. Emperors and magistrates understood that nourishing the body was inseparable from shaping loyalty, maintaining peace, and projecting stability. Every loaf of bread handed out, every barrel of wine poured, was a quiet exercise of influence. In these settings, food became a medium through which ordinary citizens experienced the power of the state. They did not merely consume, they participated in a system of ritualized generosity, a subtle reminder of their place in the hierarchy. Even the humblest porridge, or the simplest bread, carried with it echoes of governance, ritual, and community. And yet, these events were experienced as part of life's rhythm, almost invisible in their omnipresence. The daily sustenance and the occasional grand feasts alike taught Romans that survival, celebration, and obedience were intertwined. Interestingly, these feasts reflected Rome's enduring ability to organize, coordinating thousands of citizens, distributing tens of thousands of loaves, and ensuring an uninterrupted flow of wine and food was no small feat. Behind the scenes, unnamed laborers, porters, bakers, and officials formed an intricate system that held the empire together. The grandeur of the spectacle depended entirely on the ordinary diligence of countless individuals, whose efforts remain largely unrecorded. In that, we see a parallel with modern society. The structures that allow large-scale events to function often rest on quiet, unnoticed labor. Food at these banquets also carried symbolic weight. Rare spices, imported delicacies, and exotic fruits served as subtle reminders of Rome's reach and influence. By offering these, emperors communicated messages of abundance, power, and divine favor, reinforcing the perception that the city and its rulers were inseparable. Citizens, meanwhile, partook of these foods without necessarily understanding the layers of meaning, simply enjoying the sustenance, the taste, and the shared experience of communal dining. It was this balance of everyday necessity and symbolic display that made Rome's banquets so powerful, both practically and culturally. Yet the reliance on grain distributions and orchestrated feasts also exposed vulnerabilities. Crop failures, political mismanagement, or logistical disruption could trigger unrest, turning the same meals that once pacified the population into sparks for rebellion. Rome's stability, it seems, rested delicately on the mundane act of feeding its people. This tension between abundance and scarcity, generosity and control, highlights a subtle but critical point. Even the most ordinary, everyday acts, like breaking bread, can carry profound historical consequences. What emerges from this reflection is the realization that the Roman banquets were about far more than food. They were exercises in endurance, patience, and community. They reinforced hierarchy, symbolized imperial reach, and provided citizens with a sense of belonging. They were mundane rituals imbued with meaning, the kind of boring details that historians often overlook, but which formed the backbone of a functioning empire. In essence, the Roman table was a theater of life, where every meal was both ordinary and extraordinary. For modern observers, there is a quiet lesson here. Rome's citizens may have attended these feasts centuries ago, but we still organize our lives around similar rhythms: shared meals, public events, and collective celebrations that blend the practical with the symbolic. Even today, breaking bread together is rarely just about hunger. It carries social, emotional, and cultural weight. The Romans remind us that small, repeated actions, the sharing of food, the attendance at communal gatherings, are often the invisible forces that sustain societies over time. And so, the legacy of the forgotten banquets lives on. The loaves, the wine, the communal meals, and even the smallest gestures of generosity illustrate a truth about human history. It is not always the grand battles or monumental architecture that define a civilization, but the ordinary, repetitive acts that structure everyday life. Bread and wine, served quietly in the hands of citizens, may have been more enduring than the walls of the forum or the columns of temples, for they nourished not only bodies but also loyalty, community, and culture. And yet, a question lingers as we close this chapter. If the stability of an empire can rest upon such ordinary acts as feeding its people, then what unseen, small details shape the course of human history today in ways we rarely notice? It is a thought worth carrying into the quiet moments of reflection, as we consider how the mundane often carries the weight of the extraordinary. Medieval Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, principalities, and fiefdoms, each governed by its own set of laws, traditions, and expectations. Life was ruled not only by kings and nobles, but by countless written and unwritten rules that structured daily existence, sometimes in ways that seem arbitrary or even absurd today. To understand these laws is to understand how medieval society maintained its rhythms and hierarchies, ensuring that even ordinary people knew their place. One striking example is sumptuary law, which dictated what individuals could wear, what fabrics were allowed, and even which colors were appropriate. These laws were not merely fashion statements, they reinforced social hierarchy. A peasant wearing silk could be fined or punished, While nobles enjoyed the liberty of extravagant attire, clothing became a visible marker of class and status, ensuring that every individual, at a glance, could be identified and categorized. The reach of law extended even further into daily activities. Peasants could be fined for hunting on noble lands, or punished for letting their livestock stray into fields not their own. Markets and fairs were regulated with strict rules regarding prices, weights, and measures. Medieval authorities were meticulous in their concern for order. An unmeasured loaf of bread or a misweighed sack of grain could be grounds for fines, reflecting a society in which the minutiae of daily life were deeply controlled. Even leisure was regulated. Certain games were restricted, dances required permission, and public celebrations often had strict limitations to avoid disorder. For example, archery practice was sometimes mandated for males of a certain age, ensuring readiness for military campaigns. Conversely, playing dice or card games could be prohibited on certain days, considered immoral distractions from proper conduct. Every action, from work to play, existed within the shadow of law. Punishments themselves were often designed to be visible and instructive. Stocks, pillories, and public shaming were common, intended not just to penalize, but to educate the community about acceptable behavior. Lesser offenses were met with fines, more serious infractions with corporal punishment, and repeated or severe crimes with execution. Yet, despite the harshness, there was also an underlying logic. Laws were designed to create predictability and order in a society without modern policing or bureaucracy. Religious influence intertwined deeply with legal codes. Canon law dictated behaviors related to marriage, inheritance, and moral conduct, reinforcing the power of the church alongside that of local lords. Observance of feast days, fasting, and other rituals was often codified, and violations could result in fines or penance. Daily life in medieval Europe was thus a constant negotiation between secular authority, divine expectation, and the unpredictable demands of survival. Yet, even within this rigid framework, there were curious allowances and loopholes. Some towns granted exemptions to certain guild members, permitting them special privileges in clothing trade or craft. Local customs often modified written law, and oral tradition remained influential in shaping behavior. What emerges is a world in which the ordinary citizen navigated a maze of regulations, some practical, some absurd, that structured life in every conceivable way. Consider the perspective of a medieval peasant, rising at dawn, tending fields, attending church, navigating market rules, abiding by clothing restrictions, and living under the constant gaze of lords and law officers. Life was regimented. Yet, within this order lay creativity and adaptation. People learned to comply without succumbing entirely, finding small ways to enjoy freedom, express identity, and maintain community despite the rigid structures around them. It is in these seemingly mundane details, the shape of a loaf of bread, the color of a tunic, the permitted number of chickens, that the texture of medieval life truly emerges. These laws, dull though they may appear at first glance, structured a world in which survival, social cohesion, and hierarchy were inseparable. Without them, the medieval system would have struggled to maintain its delicate balance. And yet, one cannot help but wonder, if life was so meticulously regulated, how did individuals find space for personal expression, humor, and rebellion? Were there subtle resistances woven into daily routines, hidden in small defiance, that allowed people to assert identity under the weight of law? As we step further into medieval Europe, the laws that shaped daily life reveal themselves in ever more curious ways. Beyond sumptuary restrictions and market regulations, local authorities enforced a range of rules that modern eyes might find absurd. Yet to the people of the time, these laws were practical tools to maintain order, prevent conflict, and ensure survival. Take, for example, the regulation of livestock. In many villages, stray pigs, cows, or geese could become the source of disputes between neighbors. Some towns required that pigs be fitted with rings in their noses to prevent them from rooting up gardens, while cows wandering into crops could lead to immediate fines. This was less about cruelty and more about creating predictable behavior, a system that minimized disputes in a world without police forces or legal bureaucracy as we know it today. Other laws targeted noise and disruption. Bells, drums, and other musical instruments were often restricted at certain times of day, especially during church services. Villagers were fined for excessive shouting or for keeping barking dogs too close to neighbors' homes. These rules reflected a society in which communal living was close quarters, and minor disturbances could escalate quickly. Every small law, even if it seems trivial, had its place in the fragile ecosystem of medieval life. Punishments, too, were inventive. Stocks and pillories were designed to humiliate, while fines and public whippings enforced compliance. In some regions, unusual punishments were tailored to the crime. A thief might be forced to carry a heavy stone through the village, or a disruptive baker could have his oven confiscated for a period. The logic was practical. The penalty was visible, proportional, and served as a cautionary tale to the broader community. Interestingly, medieval legal codes also codified moral behavior in ways that bridged personal and social life. Regulations surrounding marriage, inheritance, and sexual conduct were enforced by both secular authorities and the church. For example, the age of consent for marriage, the approval of dowries, and the rights of widows were carefully outlined. Violations might result in fines, forced restitution, or public penance. These rules ensured not only moral conformity, but the continuity of property, lineage, and social stability. Markets were another hub of regulation. Merchants were required to use standardized weights and measures. Selling underweight loaves of bread could lead to severe fines. Certain trades, such as butchery or tanning, were restricted to guild members who met professional standards, ensuring quality and safety. The oversight was meticulous because minor infractions, a poisoned loaf, a misweighed sack of grain, could have cascading effects on the community's survival. Even seemingly whimsical laws had practical roots. In some towns, it was illegal to carry an axe or sword openly within city walls. While this may sound arbitrary, the rule was designed to reduce violence and maintain civic order. In other regions, lighting fires in public spaces or entering certain streets after dark without a lantern could result in penalties. In each case, the law addressed a tangible problem, ensuring that the daily life of the community ran smoothly. Despite these strictures, people found subtle ways to resist or adapt. Villagers might exchange gossip to navigate complex rules, while clever bakers or merchants discovered loopholes to satisfy customers while remaining technically compliant. Humor and ingenuity became survival tools in a world where one misstep could lead to public embarrassment or financial loss. Life under the law was not entirely oppressive. It encouraged adaptation, creativity, and communal negotiation. The interplay of law, morality, and practicality shaped the rhythm of medieval life. Ordinary citizens internalized these rules, developing habits and routines that balanced compliance with personal preference. Children learned early what was permitted, what was expected, and what was dangerous to ignore. Adults navigated fines, public oversight, and social pressure, cultivating resilience and awareness that allowed communities to survive amid scarcity, disease, and political instability. And yet, as much as these laws created structure, they also invite reflection. How much freedom did people truly possess in such a tightly regulated environment? And if society depended on detailed oversight of every action, from the size of a loaf of bread to the timing of a dance? What does this tell us about the relationship between law and human behavior, then and now? The laws of medieval Europe, in all their strangeness and specificity, ultimately reveal a society deeply concerned with survival, hierarchy, and communal order. They shaped the daily lives of peasants and nobles alike, influenced commerce, dictated morality, and even guided leisure. By examining these peculiar rules, we can see that medieval law was less about punishment and more about creating a predictable rhythm in an otherwise unpredictable world. Public punishments and fines, though often harsh by modern standards, served as both deterrent and social education. Stocks, pillories, and fines reminded citizens of their obligations, while visible acts of correction reinforced communal norms. For example, a thief's public humiliation did more than punish. It reminded the entire village of the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Similarly, sumptuary laws maintained clear distinctions between classes, ensuring that social hierarchy remained visible and understood by all. Yet the impact of these laws extended beyond the visible and immediate. By structuring daily life in meticulous detail, they shaped habits, expectations, and social behavior. Citizens internalized rules, learning to navigate the nuances of compliance and rebellion. Markets, streets, churches, and homes all became arenas where law, morality, and daily survival intersected. Even minor acts like wearing the wrong color or letting livestock roam freely carried consequences that reinforced the rhythm of society. Interestingly, these rules also encouraged subtle forms of adaptation and resistance. Villagers and townsfolk often found creative ways to comply without sacrificing personal freedom. Merchants exploited loopholes in trading regulations. Peasants found harmless ways to bend clothing rules. Communities developed oral traditions to supplement written law. These small acts of ingenuity were as essential to the survival of society as the laws themselves. As we reflect on the peculiarities of medieval law, it becomes clear that order and chaos were constantly in negotiation. Law was a tool to structure life, but life, with its endless variables, required interpretation, adaptation, and sometimes quiet defiance. The balance between compliance and creativity shaped not only individual lives, but also the stability and longevity of communities. The legacy of these laws extends into modern times. While contemporary societies rarely impose restrictions on the color of one's clothing or the precise shape of a loaf of bread, the principle remains. Rules are designed to manage human behavior, organize social structures, and maintain public order. Medieval Europe teaches us that even the most mundane details of life, how we eat, dress, or interact with neighbors, can carry profound significance when viewed through the lens of law and society. Perhaps the most striking lesson is this: history is often sustained not by grand battles or monumental decrees alone, but by the quiet, repetitive acts that regulate ordinary life. The peculiar laws of the Middle Ages, though they may seem trivial today, were instruments that allowed communities to function, endure, and adapt. They remind us that the ordinary details of daily life, the minutiae often dismissed as boring, can have lasting consequences on human societies. And so, one final question lingers as we leave the medieval world behind. In what ways do the invisible rules that shape our own daily lives, social norms, regulations, and expectations, quietly guide our behavior, influence our choices, and sustain the communities we inhabit? The answer may not be obvious, but it is worth pondering in the quiet moments before sleep. The Americas, long before European contact, were home to vibrant civilizations with cities that rivaled anything in the Old World. These urban centers, such as Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica or Caral in the Andes, were hubs of architecture, agriculture, and social organization. While their grandeur is often captured in the height of pyramids or plazas, the daily life of ordinary citizens offers the most intriguing window into these lost worlds. Life in these cities was deeply tied to the land. People farmed maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers, carefully rotating crops to maintain soil fertility. Farmers worked in fields outside the city walls, returning each day to their homes, which were simple but sturdy, built from stone, adobe, or thatch. Storage of food was critical. Granaries, clay pots, and communal storage facilities ensured the city could survive lean seasons or droughts. Every meal, no matter how modest, was an act of careful planning and skill, reflecting the rhythm of life in these urban centers. Trade also shaped daily experience. Markets thrived in central plazas, where artisans sold pottery, textiles, and tools, and merchants exchanged goods from distant regions. Seashells from coastal areas, obsidian from volcanic highlands, and exotic feathers or cacao beans traveled long distances, connecting cities into vast trade networks. For ordinary citizens, daily commerce was not just survival. It was participation in a system that bound communities together across hundreds of miles. Religion and ritual were inseparable from daily life. Temples, altars, and ceremonial platforms dotted the city, and festivals marked agricultural cycles or honored deities. These ceremonies often included offerings of food, textiles, or crafted objects, demonstrating devotion and reinforcing social cohesion. Participation was not limited to the elite. Commoners took part in rituals, sometimes assisting in preparations, carrying offerings, or joining processions. Through these acts, citizens connected their everyday labor to a larger cosmic order. Infrastructure also reflected the careful planning and foresight of these civilizations. Roads, aqueducts, and canals ensured the city's survival, allowing water to reach fields and households, while plazas and stairways organized the flow of people. Maintenance was continuous. Ordinary citizens often contributed labor to ensure the functionality of essential systems. The work was repetitive, mundane at times, yet crucial to the city's endurance. Even recreation was organized and communal. Ball courts, performance spaces, and open plazas allowed for games, music, and storytelling. These activities provided not only entertainment, but also social cohesion, teaching skills, reinforcing values, and offering brief reprieves from labor. In these moments, we glimpse the humanity of a city otherwise remembered for monumental architecture. Despite this vibrancy, the rise of these cities was not without challenges. Droughts, soil depletion, and political conflict threatened stability. Populations had to adapt, innovate, and cooperate to survive. The ordinary rhythms of planting, trading, and participating in ritual were acts of resilience, quietly sustaining civilization through centuries. Through these glimpses into daily life, we see that the greatness of these lost cities was not solely in monumental structures or dramatic events, but in the ordinary, repeated efforts of citizens, the farmers, merchants, builders, and families who made life possible. Each task, no matter how mundane, contributed to the endurance of communities whose names and stories would one day slip from memory. And yet, one question lingers: if daily labor and small routines were the true pillars of these civilizations, how did their disappearance reshape our understanding of what it means to build a city, to sustain a community, and to endure in the face of time's relentless passage? While the ancient cities of the Americas were once thriving centers of life, their decline reminds us that even the most carefully organized societies are vulnerable to forces beyond daily control. Understanding this decline requires looking at the interplay between environmental pressures, social structures, and human decision-making. A story told not in battlefields or royal decrees, but in the quiet traces left behind. Take Teotihuacan near modern-day Mexico City. At its height, it was home to perhaps 125,000 people, with wide avenues, towering pyramids, and densely packed residential compounds. Scholars still debate why the city eventually fell, but evidence points to internal unrest, resource depletion, and possibly climate stress. Fields that once fed the population may have become exhausted, canals may have failed, and social cohesion may have frayed. For ordinary residents, the decline would have been gradual. Missed harvests, water shortages, and the subtle erosion of trust in city leadership. Similarly, Carol in the Peruvian Andes offers a quieter story of resilience and eventual abandonment. Built over 400–500 years ago, Carol was a hub of agriculture, trade, and ritual. Monumental pyramids and plazas reflected a sophisticated urban plan, yet daily life remained grounded in farming, weaving, and trade. Archaeological evidence suggests that as resources became stretched, and possibly as trade networks shifted, residents slowly left, leaving behind their homes, granaries, and temples. The city did not vanish in catastrophe. It faded, leaving a silent testament to the impermanence of human settlements. Climate played a subtle but powerful role. Droughts, unpredictable rainfall, and soil exhaustion could render once fertile valleys incapable of sustaining populations. For citizens whose lives revolved around planting, harvesting, and transporting food, these environmental stresses were not abstract. They were daily challenges that shaped choices, migration patterns, and the survival of entire communities. The resilience of ordinary people was tested, and sometimes the simplest solution, leaving the city, was the only viable option. Abandonment often left behind the very artifacts that inform our understanding today. Household items, cooking utensils, ceremonial objects, and art all survive to tell the story of daily life, even as the structures crumble around them. From these fragments, historians reconstruct ordinary routines, the preparation of maize, the trade of textiles, the participation in ritual. These mundane details, when viewed together, paint a picture of societies that were complex, adaptable, and deeply human. Trade networks, once the lifeblood of cities, could also accelerate decline. Cities that depended on distant sources of obsidian, cacao, or shells were vulnerable to shifts in political alliances, warfare, or natural barriers. When the flow of goods was disrupted, urban life faltered. The collapse of trade meant shortages, which in turn undermined social stability. For residents, survival became a series of adaptations, rationing, relocating, or seeking new alliances. Ordinary life, cooking, farming, trading, became a delicate balance against forces far larger than themselves. Even as cities declined, the imprint of human ingenuity remained. Terraces, aqueducts, and pyramids continued to stand, silent witnesses to the organization and effort required to sustain a civilization. The lessons embedded in these structures are not only technical, but also cultural. They reveal values, priorities, and the daily labor that supported monumental achievements. Ordinary citizens, often anonymous in historical records, were the true architects of survival, and yet mysteries persist. Why did some cities survive longer than others? What social or environmental adaptations could have prevented abandonment? These unanswered questions underscore the limits of historical knowledge, reminding us that even with evidence in hand, the human experience can remain partly unknowable. Through all this, one key point emerges: the rise and fall of these cities was not determined solely by dramatic events. Instead, It was the accumulation of small, repeated actions. The tending of crops, the maintenance of canals, the preparation of daily meals, that ultimately defined their endurance or collapse. In the quiet details of ordinary life lies the hidden story of civilization itself. As we step into the remnants of the Americas' lost cities, it becomes clear that these were not mere ruins, but repositories of human endeavor, ingenuity, and adaptation. The story of these urban centers, from Teotihuacan in central Mexico to Carol in Peru, and many smaller settlements scattered across the continent, is a tale of ordinary people shaping extraordinary places, then gradually witnessing their decline and disappearance. Unlike dramatic conquests or sudden natural disasters, the disappearance of these cities often came quietly, leaving behind subtle traces that whisper the complexities of human life in times long past. Daily life in these cities was both structured and vibrant. Citizens rose with the sun to tend fields, transport goods, or maintain homes, often under the guidance of sophisticated civic planning that included terraced farms, canals, and communal storage. The rhythm of life was dictated by agricultural cycles, religious festivals, and trade schedules. Even leisure was intertwined with the city's organization. Ball courts, plazas, and ceremonial spaces were sites of social learning, ritual, and communal interaction. Ordinary labor, seemingly mundane at first glance, was in fact the invisible force sustaining entire societies. Trade formed the lifeblood of these urban centers. Obsidian for tools, cacao for rituals and currency, seashells for decoration, and textiles for clothing were all exchanged through vast networks, stretching across mountains, rivers, and deserts. Citizens, from merchants to porters, participated daily in maintaining these networks, ensuring that goods arrived on time and were properly allocated. Such commerce not only fulfilled material needs, but also reinforced social ties, hierarchies, and cultural identity. A simple trade of maize for pottery represented more than survival. It reflected the interconnectedness of human lives and the careful balance of trust and labor that underpinned urban stability. Religion and ritual were interwoven with both daily labor and civic life. Temples and ceremonial platforms were more than monuments, they were hubs of social cohesion. Ordinary citizens participated in offerings, processions, and seasonal festivals, linking personal effort to larger cosmological and societal structures. Rituals reinforced the city's cohesion while reminding individuals of their role in sustaining a complex social system. These ceremonies, although repetitive, mundane, or quietly procedural, carried profound significance, guiding both behavior and belief in ways that modern observers might overlook. However, life in these cities was not without challenge. Environmental pressures loomed over every decision. Periodic droughts could imperil crops, river floods could disrupt irrigation, volcanic activity threatened settlements. Ordinary citizens responded with adaptive strategies, storing surplus food, maintaining aqueducts and canals, rotating crops, and participating in communal labor projects. Yet even with extraordinary ingenuity, these systems had limits. Resource depletion, shifting trade routes, or social unrest could erode the very foundations of a city. Decline often unfolded gradually, visible in subtle archaeological clues: abandoned homes, unmaintained terraces, and deserted plazas. Unlike the sudden destruction often dramatized in popular history, the disappearance of many cities was measured and incremental. Residents left in stages, moving to more fertile areas or merging with neighboring communities. What remained behind, pottery shards, granaries, ceremonial platforms, offers glimpses of daily life and ordinary routines, capturing the resilience and ingenuity of citizens who once walked these streets. One striking lesson is the importance of ordinary human labor in sustaining complex societies. While monumental pyramids or temples draw admiration, it was the daily, often unnoticed work, tending fields, preparing meals, transporting goods, maintaining infrastructure, that truly enabled these cities to thrive. These small, repetitive acts were the engine of civilization, quietly sustaining both material and social frameworks. Without the constant efforts of countless ordinary individuals, monumental achievements would have been impossible. Trade and agriculture were not the only factors shaping endurance. Governance, social organization, and adaptability played crucial roles. Leaders coordinated labor, enforced rules, and mediated disputes, ensuring that daily routines could proceed smoothly. Communities developed systems for sharing resources, distributing food, and supporting those in need. Even in decline, the remnants of these systems reveal remarkable sophistication, suggesting that survival relied not only on environmental adaptation, but also on careful social planning. Yet, as impressive as these accomplishments were, vulnerability remained. When environmental stresses, social tensions, or trade disruptions exceeded a city's capacity to adapt, decline became inevitable. The fading of a city was neither dramatic nor sudden. It was a quiet process of attrition, in which ordinary life slowly unraveled. Families abandoned homes, granaries fell silent, and ceremonial spaces were left empty. What survives today, ruins and artifacts, captures the traces of both triumph and loss, offering a window into lives otherwise lost to history. From these stories emerges a profound reflection: human civilizations, no matter how advanced or organized, are fragile. Monumental architecture and grand trade networks cannot alone ensure survival. It is the cumulative effect of daily labor, careful planning, social cohesion, and adaptability that sustains a society. The lost cities of the Americas teach us that ordinary acts, planting a field, carrying water, performing ritual, trading goods, are the true pillars of civilization. Without them, even the most impressive monuments crumble and fade. For modern observers, there is another enduring lesson: the details we often consider mundane may hold the greatest significance in shaping history. In the quiet repetition of ordinary tasks lies resilience, foresight, and community. The lost cities remind us that survival is rarely dependent on extraordinary heroics alone. It is built on the collective, sustained effort of countless individuals performing daily acts of care, labor, and collaboration. And yet, even as we reflect on these ancient societies, a lingering question remains: if the endurance of cities relied on ordinary acts, what are the unnoticed daily actions in our own communities that will define the legacy of our civilization hundreds or thousands of years from now? Perhaps, like the ruins in the Americas, these acts are quietly shaping the future, even as we sleep, eat, work, and interact in ways that seem small or ordinary. The Renaissance, spanning roughly the 14th to 17th centuries, is often remembered for its masterpieces of art, architecture, and literature. Yet, behind the grandeur of frescoes and cathedrals lies another dimension: the persistent drive to invent, improve, and experiment. Curious minds sought solutions to practical problems, creating devices that ranged from the elegantly simple to the intricately complex. These inventions were not always celebrated or remembered. Many served humble purposes, quietly shaping daily life in ways we may now overlook. Workshops and studios across Italy, Germany, and beyond became laboratories of creativity. Craftsmen and inventors experimented with mechanisms, materials, and techniques. Some innovations were intended to ease labor: improved gears for mills, water lifting devices for irrigation, or novel presses for printing books. Others sought to improve comfort, from early mechanical clocks to folding chairs, or even contraptions designed to maintain cleanliness and hygiene in homes. Each device reflected the inventive spirit of a society increasingly interested in observation, problem solving, and efficiency. Leonardo da Vinci, though often celebrated for his art, exemplified this intersection of curiosity and practicality. His sketches reveal flying machines, hydraulic pumps, and automated devices, many of which were never built, yet served as conceptual blueprints for later technology. Beyond the famous polymath, countless artisans produced ingenious but less known inventions: self-watering planters, early eyeglasses, or mechanical toys. These creations, though seemingly trivial at the time, reflected a culture deeply engaged with understanding and manipulating the natural world. Everyday life benefited from smaller, practical inventions that rarely make it into history books. Improvements in locks and keys enhanced security. Innovations in textile production increased efficiency and comfort. Cooking implements evolved to better suit the tastes and needs of households. Renaissance inventors were motivated not only by curiosity, but by a practical desire to improve the human experience, and their work demonstrates how technological progress is often rooted in the minutiae of ordinary life. Public spaces, too, became arenas for invention. Markets, workshops, and guild halls showcased new devices and techniques, while patrons commissioned unique creations for domestic or civic use. Innovations were displayed as symbols of status, ingenuity, or civic pride. A wealthy merchant might boast a mechanical water fountain in his courtyard, while city officials commissioned devices to improve sanitation or monitor time. Even if these innovations were not universally adopted, they shaped perceptions of possibility and inspired others to experiment. Yet not all inventions were purely functional. Some were designed for curiosity, amusement, or spectacle. Automata, mechanical figures capable of movement, entertained both courts and public gatherings. Clocks with moving figurines or devices that produced sounds fascinated observers, blending artistry with engineering. These creations, while not essential for survival, reveal a society that valued intellectual exploration and playful experimentation. In parallel, innovations in knowledge and communication magnified the impact of inventions. The printing press, for instance, revolutionized the dissemination of technical and scientific ideas, allowing inventors to share designs and concepts across Europe. A blacksmith in Florence could learn of a new water-lifting device developed in Venice, or a scholar in Mainz could replicate a clever clock mechanism first sketched in Rome. These networks of information accelerated innovation, linking ordinary inventors into a broader web of discovery. Importantly, many inventions were shaped by the daily needs of ordinary people, not just elite patrons or scholars. Agricultural tools improved yield, household devices reduced labor, instruments enhanced navigation or trade. The Renaissance was not only an era of high art, but also an era in which curiosity and practical necessity intertwined, producing innovations that quietly enhanced everyday life while laying the foundation for future technological progress. The labor and thought invested in these inventions often went unrecognized. Many devices were never built, or if constructed, were forgotten within decades. Yet their existence testifies to a culture that prized experimentation, observation, and careful attention to detail. Renaissance inventors remind us that history is often advanced not by monumental events alone, but by the patient, incremental efforts of individuals striving to solve problems, improve life, and explore possibilities. And yet, one question lingers as we consider these curious inventions. How many brilliant ideas have been lost to time, their creators forgotten, and their innovations unrealized? What everyday technologies that we now take for granted were once the product of painstaking experimentation, overlooked by history until rediscovery? These are mysteries that echo quietly, waiting to be pondered in the stillness of reflection. The Renaissance was a period defined not only by grand masterpieces of art and architecture, but also by relentless experimentation and technological curiosity. Inventors sought practical solutions to daily challenges, while others pursued ideas driven by pure curiosity, often blurring the line between utility and spectacle. In this section, we explore some of the ingenious devices that reveal how ordinary life, necessity, and imagination intersected during this remarkable era. One area of intense innovation was agriculture. Farmers relied on tools that improved efficiency and reduced labor, and Renaissance inventors eagerly adapted and refined these implements. For instance, the mechanized seed drill allowed for more precise planting, increasing crop yield and reducing manual effort. Water-lifting devices including Archimedes-inspired screw pumps were employed to irrigate fields more effectively. Even relatively simple adjustments to plows and hoes, changes in weight, shape, or leverage, could dramatically improve productivity, demonstrating the value placed on careful observation of daily routines. Urban life also benefited from technological creativity. Mechanical clocks, for example, became both a practical and symbolic innovation. Town squares were adorned with clocks featuring moving figures, bells, and chimes, which not only marked time, but communicated civic pride and ingenuity. For ordinary citizens, these clocks structured daily life, signaling the beginning of market hours, work shifts, or religious observances. The combination of precision engineering and aesthetic design exemplified the Renaissance pursuit of both function and beauty. In domestic spaces, inventors experimented with devices designed to improve comfort and efficiency. Folding chairs, mechanical beds, and self-watering planters were developed for wealthier households, reflecting an emerging interest in convenience and quality of life. Kitchens saw innovations such as rotating spits, specialized ovens, and efficient cooking implements, which streamlined food preparation for families and households. These inventions, though modest in scope, reveal the daily concerns and priorities of ordinary people, from the laborer's tools to the domestic routines of the household. Entertainment and spectacle also inspired ingenuity. Automata, mechanical figures capable of motion, sometimes accompanied by music or sound, fascinated audiences across Europe. Elaborate theatre machinery allowed for moving scenery, trapdoors, and effects that brought stories to life in ways previously unimaginable. These devices were not merely whimsical, they also reflected a deep understanding of mechanics, balance, and design. For the average citizen attending a performance, the automata provided awe and delight, connecting them to the intellectual culture of the age in tangible ways. Military and navigational inventions further illustrate the intersection of necessity and innovation. New techniques in shipbuilding, such as improved hull designs and rigging systems, allowed for safer and more efficient exploration. Compasses, astrolabes, and other instruments refined navigation, enabling sailors to travel farther with greater precision. Siege engines, cannons, and fortification enhancements demonstrate that even in conflict, invention was driven by observation, testing, and adaptation. A blend of scientific reasoning and practical need. Education and dissemination of knowledge were equally critical. The printing press, a revolutionary invention of the era, allowed for the mass production of books, technical diagrams, and instructional manuals. Designs for devices, instructions for construction, and treatises on mechanical principles could now be shared widely. Artisans and inventors learned from one another across cities and nations, creating a network of experimentation that amplified the impact of individual ingenuity. Ordinary workshops became part of a broader web of knowledge, where ideas were tested, refined, and transmitted to new generations. The Renaissance also nurtured curiosity for the sake of curiosity. Inventors and scholars often pursued thought experiments, devising devices that may never have been built, such as flying machines, perpetual motion devices, or intricate mechanical models of the human body. These endeavors, while speculative, highlight a culture fascinated with understanding the principles of nature, engineering, and human anatomy. Even when unrealized, these conceptual inventions informed future experimentation, showing that imagination can be as critical as practical implementation. Daily life, work, and play were all infused with this inventive spirit. Citizens participated in experimentation, whether by learning new techniques, adapting tools, or observing demonstrations. Markets, guild halls, and public workshops became hubs of innovation, linking ordinary labor with creative exploration. Each invention, from a simple kitchen implement to an elaborate automaton, reflected a society attentive to detail, capable of merging artistry with practicality, and constantly seeking incremental improvements. Yet, the legacy of these inventions is as much about what was lost as what survived. Many devices were forgotten, their creators unremembered, or their designs never replicated. Still, the impact persists in the underlying principles: careful observation, iterative design, attention to detail, and the interplay between curiosity and necessity. Renaissance inventors remind us that progress is often the sum of countless small improvements, experiments, and observations, many invisible to the casual observer. And, as we reflect on this inventive era, a question emerges: how many of the ideas that shape our modern lives are rooted in the quiet, incremental experiments of ordinary people in Renaissance workshops? How often does history overlook the daily labor and subtle ingenuity that form the foundation for monumental achievements? The story of Renaissance inventions encourages us to look closer, to appreciate the mundane brilliance that quietly shapes human progress. The Renaissance, often celebrated for its grand artworks and towering cathedrals, also left a quieter yet equally profound legacy in the form of inventions and innovations that shaped daily life, technology, and society. These creations, whether practical, whimsical, or speculative, reveal a period in which ordinary people, artisans, craftsmen, laborers, and patrons alike, played an essential role in advancing knowledge and improving the human experience. The culmination of Renaissance ingenuity lies not merely in the devices themselves, but in the cultural and social structures that nurtured experimentation, encouraged observation, and valued practical problem solving. One of the most striking aspects of this period was the seamless integration of art and science. Inventors approached problem solving with an aesthetic sensibility, merging function with elegance. Mechanical clocks, for example, were simultaneously instruments of timekeeping and decorative marvels. Public squares were adorned with elaborate timepieces featuring moving figures and musical chimes, designed to both serve practical needs and delight observers. Such creations highlight the Renaissance belief that utility and beauty were not mutually exclusive but could reinforce one another. Ordinary citizens, encountering these devices daily, absorbed an implicit lesson in precision, creativity, and the value of meticulous craftsmanship. Workshops across Europe, from Florence to Nuremberg, became centers of experimentation. Here, artisans worked on tools to improve efficiency in agriculture, craft, and domestic life. Mechanical seed drills, water-lifting devices, improved looms, and specialized cooking implements exemplify the way inventors responded to practical problems. Each innovation, while addressing immediate needs, also encouraged further experimentation. A modification to a loom might inspire a new weaving technique. A better water pump could inform the design of irrigation systems elsewhere. In these subtle chains of influence, ordinary laborers and inventors contributed to cumulative technological progress, often without recognition. Automata and mechanical toys provide another lens into Renaissance innovation. While these devices may appear whimsical, they reflect sophisticated understanding of mechanics, timing, and materials. Mechanical birds that sang, figurines that moved, and theater machinery that changed scenes automatically demonstrate how experimentation and creativity intertwined with public performance. Ordinary citizens, whether spectators or craftsmen, experience technology as an intimate part of social and cultural life. The mechanical ingenuity of these devices, often overlooked in historical narratives, underscores the era's unique blend of artistry, engineering, and curiosity. Navigation and exploration also benefited from inventive ingenuity. The Renaissance coincided with an era of expanding global exploration, and instruments such as the compass, astrolabe, and early sextants were refined to meet practical needs. Ship designs improved to handle longer voyages, and maps incorporated new knowledge of coasts, rivers, and trade routes. Ordinary sailors, map makers, and shipbuilders applied these inventions daily, enabling not only commercial and military success, but also the exchange of ideas, goods, and cultures across continents. The innovations of this period were thus inseparable from both social life and global transformation. Education, communication, and dissemination of knowledge amplified the impact of inventions. The printing press allowed inventors and scholars to share designs, diagrams, and instructions widely. Manuals detailing mechanical devices, scientific principles, or artisanal techniques became accessible beyond individual workshops. This democratization of knowledge ensured that ideas could cross regions, inspiring new inventions, adapting old concepts, and fostering a culture of shared experimentation. Ordinary people, from apprentices to merchants, became participants in a broader network of innovation, connecting daily labor with intellectual advancement. Despite the remarkable ingenuity, many Renaissance inventions were fleeting. Devices remained prototypes, experiments that failed to achieve widespread adoption, or ideas that were never constructed, yet even these, lost. Inventions contributed to the intellectual environment, shaping subsequent discoveries. The iterative process of experimentation, observation, trial, failure, and refinement laid the groundwork for future technological breakthroughs. Ordinary inventors, often forgotten by name, were the engines behind this accumulation of knowledge. Their meticulous attention to detail, patient experimentation, and willingness to adapt mundane tools into complex mechanisms were the true drivers of progress. The legacy of these inventions extends far beyond their immediate applications. Mechanisms and principles developed during the Renaissance influenced industrialization centuries later, informing mechanical engineering, precision tools, and even modern computing concepts. Household improvements, agricultural tools, and navigation devices gradually transformed everyday life, illustrating how incremental innovations accumulate over generations. In this sense, the Renaissance is a reminder that progress is often quiet, built upon small, persistent efforts rather than sudden leaps or dramatic events. Reflecting on these contributions, it becomes evident that the Renaissance's inventive spirit was as much cultural as technical. Communities nurtured observation, experimentation, and practical problem-solving. Curiosity was celebrated, mistakes were tolerated as part of learning, and ordinary labor was valued for its capacity to sustain experimentation and innovation. In a world without mass education or formalized scientific institutions, ordinary individuals contributed in ways that were both tangible, building, crafting, experimenting, and intellectual, refining methods and sharing knowledge. Perhaps the most important lesson from this period is the recognition that invention is often invisible in its time. The devices and techniques that shaped daily life were rarely monumental, yet they had profound effects on how societies functioned and adapted. From the water-lifting pumps in a small village to the mechanical automata in a city square, each invention connected to the lives of ordinary people, quietly influencing patterns of labor, leisure, trade, and cultural exchange. The Renaissance teaches us that human ingenuity flourishes not only in moments of genius, but also in the patient, cumulative work of countless individuals engaging with the ordinary world. As we conclude this story, one thought lingers: the ordinary details of daily life, the tools we create, the improvements we make, the small experiments we conduct, often have consequences far beyond our awareness. In reflecting on Renaissance inventions, we see that the quiet persistence of curiosity, creativity, and observation is as powerful as any monumental achievement. How many of the small acts of innovation and problem-solving happening today, in workshops, kitchens, and offices around the world, will quietly shape the future in ways we cannot yet imagine? Perhaps, like the inventions of the Renaissance, they will leave traces for future generations to marvel at, and wonder how ordinary people quietly made history. Food has always been far more than mere sustenance. It is a reflection of climate, culture, trade, and social hierarchy. In medieval Europe, for example, diets varied widely depending on status. Peasants relied primarily on bread, grains, and seasonal vegetables, often supplemented by small amounts of cheese or fish. Meat was rare and typically reserved for holidays or festivals. The preparation of food, from milling grain to baking bread, was a daily routine that required skill, effort, and careful timing. Even these seemingly mundane tasks shaped the rhythm of life and the structure of communities. In contrast, the upper classes indulged in elaborate feasts, where presentation and novelty were as important as taste. Exotic spices, imported from Asia or the Middle East, were prized not only for flavor but for signaling wealth and status. Dishes such as spiced meats, elaborate pastries, and marinated fish reflected both global trade networks and the social importance of food as a marker of hierarchy. Yet beneath the grandeur, ordinary cooks in noble households faced the relentless labor of preparing meals to satisfy exacting standards, highlighting the invisible human effort behind culinary spectacle. Across the world, food habits revealed cultural ingenuity and adaptation to local environments. In Japan, for instance, rice and fermented products dominated diets, supplemented by vegetables, fish, and occasional poultry. Fermentation was not only a technique for preserving food, but also a means of enhancing flavor and nutrition. Similarly, in ancient Mesoamerica, maize formed the staple of everyday meals, often transformed into tortillas, tamales, or beverages like atole. These practices illustrate how ordinary people optimized local resources for sustenance while creating cultural identities intertwined with food. Trade and exploration further enriched diets. Spices, sugar, chocolate, and coffee traveled across continents, introducing flavors previously unknown and transforming culinary practices. Yet access to these ingredients was unequal, with the wealthy enjoying the majority of exotic imports while ordinary citizens relied on staples. The very scarcity of certain ingredients also drove ingenuity, leading to the creation of substitutes, preservation techniques, and new recipes that reflected both necessity and creativity. In addition to daily sustenance, food practices were deeply intertwined with ritual and religion. Fasting, feasting, and ceremonial meals shaped both personal routines and communal identities. In Europe, Lent imposed periods of dietary restriction, encouraging the consumption of fish, grains, and vegetables over meat. In Asia, Buddhist and Shinto practices influenced vegetarianism, seasonal preparation, and the mindful consumption of food. Such customs demonstrate how ordinary meals were imbued with broader meaning, connecting daily life to spiritual observance, social cohesion, and moral practice. Food preservation, while often overlooked, was central to survival. Techniques such as salting, smoking, pickling, and fermenting extended the life of perishable items, ensuring availability during scarce seasons. Ordinary families spent hours preparing preserved foods, a labor-intensive routine that required knowledge, skill, and careful attention. These practices, while mundane, were essential for survival, reflecting an intimate understanding of natural processes, climate, and resource management. Street food and communal meals also reveal the social dimension of eating. In ancient Rome, bustling marketplaces offered simple fare for ordinary citizens: bread, olives, cheese, and stews. Similarly, in medieval European towns, communal ovens allowed residents to bake bread collectively, while taverns provided spaces for socialization alongside meals. These everyday practices highlight the intersection of food, labor, and community, emphasizing that even ordinary diets played a central role in shaping social life. Odd or surprising foods were not uncommon. In certain regions, people consumed insects, fermented fish, or unusual plant varieties, driven by necessity, culture, or experimentation. While such items might seem peculiar today, they were often nutritious, accessible, and culturally significant. Observing these practices encourages us to recognize the adaptability and ingenuity embedded in daily life, as well as the ways in which ordinary meals can reflect both survival and identity. Food was also closely linked to technological innovation. Mortars and pestles, mills, ovens, and fermentation vessels were essential tools in kitchens across continents. Their design, maintenance, and use required skill and knowledge passed down through generations. Ordinary people, cooks, bakers, and farmers, were the custodians of this knowledge, ensuring continuity, efficiency, and quality in the food supply. Without their labor, both the mundane and ceremonial aspects of culinary life would have faltered. Even the simplest meals carried lessons in resilience and resourcefulness. A basic porridge or bread loaf represents a history of careful cultivation, processing, and preparation. Preserved fish, salted meat, or dried vegetables reflect adaptations to seasonal and environmental challenges. Every ordinary act of cooking, storing, or distributing food was a measure of human ingenuity and cooperation, quietly sustaining communities over generations. And yet, the question lingers as we consider these historical food practices: how much of our modern culinary culture depends on small, unseen labor, ingenuity, and adaptation? How many practices we consider ordinary today carry echoes of centuries of experimentation, necessity, and human creativity? By examining the seemingly mundane routines of historical meals, we gain insight into the resilience, intelligence, and adaptability that underpin human survival across time. As we move deeper into historical food traditions, it becomes clear that what people ate was shaped not only by availability, but also by culture, climate, and ingenuity. Survival often depended on the clever use of ingredients and inventive preservation methods. From Europe to Asia and the Americas to Oceania, ordinary people developed techniques that transformed raw materials into edible, sometimes surprisingly sophisticated meals. In medieval Europe, preservation was a necessity. Salted meat, smoked fish, pickled vegetables, and dried grains allowed communities to survive harsh winters and poor harvests. Ordinary families spent hours laboring over these processes, ensuring that each item was stored correctly. Fermentation, in particular, was widely used. From sauerkraut in Germany to sourdough breads in France, fermentation not only extended shelf life, but also enhanced flavor and nutrition. These practices required attention, patience, and trial and error knowledge passed down through generations, a quiet testament to human ingenuity. Odd food combinations were also commonplace. In some regions, people mixed grains with legumes to create hearty, protein-rich porridges, while in others, sweet and savory flavors mingled in dishes prepared for both everyday consumption and festive occasions. Spices, while often expensive, were used creatively to mask flavors of preserved meats, or to add variety to simple staples. Even the poorest households experimented with what they had on hand, turning survival into subtle culinary artistry. In Japan, preservation techniques were highly refined. Pickled vegetables, fermented soy products, and dried seafood formed staples that could be stored for months. The careful layering of flavors and textures, combined with knowledge of seasonal cycles, made ordinary meals both practical and culturally meaningful. Similarly, in Mesoamerica, the use of maize, beans, and chili in combination allowed for nutrient-rich meals that could be prepared and stored for long journeys or communal events. Ordinary foods were transformed into culturally significant dishes, reflecting adaptation, taste, and social practice. Communal food traditions further shaped daily life. In Roman cities, public bakeries and street vendors supplied basic fare for ordinary citizens: bread, cheese, olives, and simple stews. Medieval European towns often relied on shared ovens, allowing households to bake collectively and save fuel. These practices reinforced community bonds, with ordinary culinary routines fostering social cohesion and cooperation. Even small acts, sharing surplus bread or preserving vegetables for neighbors, carried social significance. Certain foods were reserved for rituals, celebrations, or social distinction. In Europe, spiced meats or elaborate pastries marked festivals, while in Asia, seasonal fruits and symbolic dishes accompanied religious observances. Ordinary families prepared these foods carefully, observing traditions and ensuring that meals aligned with societal expectations. While the labor behind these preparations might seem mundane, it represented a meaningful contribution to cultural continuity, connecting individual effort to broader community and spiritual life. Oddities and curiosities abound in historical diets. In some cultures, insects or small animals were consumed as protein sources. In others, fermented or pungent foods, like garum in ancient Rome or surströmming in Sweden, were commonplace. What may appear bizarre today was often practical, nutritious, and culturally embedded. Ordinary people adapted their diets to available resources, climate challenges, and social norms, reflecting resilience and creativity. Technology played a critical role in shaping what and how people ate. Mills, ovens, presses, and fermentation vessels required careful maintenance and skillful operation. Ordinary laborers, from bakers to millers, ensured that these tools functioned efficiently, sustaining both everyday diets and ceremonial meals. Knowledge of food preparation, storage, and safety became an integral part of community life, passed from generation to generation, often quietly shaping survival. Trade expanded culinary horizons, bringing new ingredients and techniques into daily routines. Spices, sugar, chocolate, and exotic fruits traveled across continents, enriching diets and offering opportunities for experimentation. Ordinary cooks experimented with unfamiliar flavors, creating fusion dishes centuries before the term existed. Even in modest households, these ingredients transformed mundane meals into culturally significant experiences. Ultimately, the ordinary labor behind historical food practices underscores a profound truth: survival and culture are inseparable. Daily routines, baking bread, fermenting vegetables, preserving meat, required ingenuity, attention, and patience. These acts, often invisible in historical records, were essential for sustaining communities, shaping cultural identity, and enabling societies to thrive despite environmental and social challenges. As we reflect on these food traditions, a question emerges: how many of the seemingly simple meals we consume today carry echoes of centuries of adaptation, experimentation, and human ingenuity? How do ordinary culinary practices continue to shape culture, resilience, and identity across generations? In exploring the peculiar and practical foods of history, we glimpse the quiet brilliance of everyday life and the extraordinary resilience embedded in ordinary meals. As we conclude our exploration of historical food traditions, it becomes clear that what people ate, how they prepared it, and the rituals surrounding meals had far-reaching effects beyond mere sustenance. These culinary practices shaped social structures, cultural identity, technological innovation, and even trade networks. The ordinary acts of cooking, preserving, and sharing food carried profound consequences, quietly influencing both communities and future generations. In Europe, the labor behind daily meals was often invisible but essential. Bakers rose before dawn to ensure fresh bread, cooks tended fires and prepared complex dishes for both daily consumption and special occasions. Preservation techniques such as salting, smoking, pickling, and fermenting extended the availability of food, allowing communities to survive seasonal shortages or adverse weather. While these processes may appear mundane, they required careful attention, experimentation, and skill, traits that were vital for survival and continuity. Ordinary people, performing these repetitive tasks, contributed to the resilience of their societies in ways often overlooked by history. Across the globe, different cultures developed unique approaches to nutrition, preservation, and culinary expression. In Asia, fermentation created foods rich in flavor and nutrients, from miso and soy sauce to pickled vegetables. In Mesoamerica, maize, beans, and squash were combined into dishes that balanced flavor and nutrition, forming the foundation of a culture's diet for centuries. These practices not only met immediate needs, but also reflected social structures, spiritual beliefs, and the collective wisdom of ordinary communities. Every meal carried layers of meaning, connecting individuals to tradition, environment, and community. Street foods, market stalls, and communal cooking spaces also played a pivotal role in shaping culinary culture. Roman marketplaces offered citizens simple fare, while medieval European towns relied on communal ovens for baking. These practices reinforced social cohesion, with ordinary acts of sharing food or preparing meals for others creating bonds between neighbors and generations. Even seemingly insignificant culinary rituals, breaking bread, sharing a stew, or preparing festival dishes, served as mechanisms of cultural continuity. Trade and exploration introduced new flavors, ingredients, and techniques into everyday life. Exotic spices, sugar, and chocolate traveled across continents, transforming the diets of both elites and commoners. Ordinary cooks adapted these ingredients into their routines, creating fusion dishes and novel preparations. These culinary adaptations highlight human creativity and flexibility, illustrating how ordinary efforts in the kitchen could influence broader cultural trends over time. Technological innovations were inseparable from food practices. Mills, presses, ovens, fermentation vessels, and storage containers enabled more efficient preparation and preservation. Ordinary laborers maintained and operated these tools, ensuring their effectiveness and continuity. Knowledge of these technologies was passed down through generations, often orally or through apprenticeship, embedding expertise within communities. Each small improvement, a better designed oven, a more effective pickling jar, or a more durable grain storage method, contributed incrementally to societal resilience and cultural enrichment. Cultural and ritual significance elevated certain foods beyond nutrition. Festivals, religious observances, and communal gatherings relied on specific dishes, creating a rhythm to daily and seasonal life. Ordinary families invested time and effort into preparing these foods, linking culinary practice to social expectation, moral practice, and cultural identity. In doing so, meals became a vehicle for education, social cohesion, and the transmission of values from one generation to the next. Odd or unusual foods, which may appear exotic or unpalatable today, often fulfilled practical purposes. Insects, fermented fish, or unusual grains were not curiosities but reliable sources of nutrition and energy. Ordinary people, guided by experimentation and environmental knowledge, optimize local resources to sustain their communities. These practices illustrate the resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity inherent in everyday life, qualities that allowed societies to endure and thrive over centuries. Even as societies modernized, historical food practices left a lasting legacy. Recipes, preservation methods, and culinary techniques evolved, but retained the essence of earlier generations' problem-solving, adaptation, and creativity. Today's kitchens, markets, and food rituals carry echoes of these ordinary acts, reminding us that history is built not only on monumental events, but on the quiet, persistent labor and innovation of countless individuals. Reflecting on these culinary traditions, one realizes that ordinary meals carry extraordinary significance. They embody resilience, creativity, and cultural continuity. From the simplest bread loaf to the most elaborate festival dish, historical foods reveal the labor, ingenuity, and care that sustained generations. These ordinary acts, repeated daily and unnoticed, are the foundations upon which societies were built, silently shaping both history and human experience. And as we consider the past, a lingering question emerges: how many aspects of our modern diet, culinary culture, or food-related technology are rooted in the ingenuity, experimentation, and daily efforts of people whose names we may never know? Just as ordinary cooks preserved communities through centuries, perhaps our small, daily choices in kitchens and markets are quietly shaping the legacy of the present for future generations. The story of historical cuisine reminds us that history is alive in the ordinary, that survival and culture are inseparable, and that even the humblest meals carry the weight of human ingenuity and endurance. Human life has always been filled with uncertainties: illness, poor harvests, unexpected weather, and unforeseen events. To cope with this unpredictability, societies developed rituals, beliefs, and superstitions that provided a sense of order and protection. These practices, often appearing peculiar or arbitrary today, were integral to daily life, offering guidance and reassurance to ordinary people navigating a world largely beyond their control. In medieval Europe, superstitions permeated domestic, social, and professional life. Households employed charms and amulets to ward off misfortune. Herbs such as rosemary, garlic, and sage were hung in homes or worn to protect against disease or evil spirits. Odd objects like horseshoes nailed above doorways were believed to attract good luck and repel negativity. These practices, while seemingly trivial, were deeply embedded in social norms and personal routines, shaping how ordinary people lived, worked, and interacted with their environment. Health-related superstitions were particularly prevalent. Before the widespread understanding of germs and pathogens, ordinary people relied on ritual and observation to prevent disease. Salt water and incantations were used to purify spaces, while charms were believed to protect children and adults from illness. Some practices combined practical hygiene with symbolic meaning. For instance, washing hands before meals both removed visible dirt and invoked protection against unseen forces. These routines reflect the blending of observable care with culturally mediated belief systems. Superstitions also influenced agricultural practices. Farmers interpreted natural signs, the behavior of animals, the patterns of clouds, or the timing of seasonal events, to guide planting, harvesting, and animal husbandry. Certain rituals, such as walking around fields with specific incantations or offerings, were believed to ensure crop fertility or protect livestock. Even if these practices did not have a direct effect on outcomes, they provided structure, predictability, and a psychological sense of control over an uncertain environment. Trade and travel were similarly guided by belief. Merchants and sailors relied on omens, charms, and ritualized behaviors to safeguard journeys. Ancient mariners might hang protective talismans in their ships, while market traders employed symbols of prosperity and protection in their stalls. Ordinary participants in commerce internalized these routines, weaving them into the fabric of daily life, not merely as superstition, but as culturally endorsed practices offering reassurance and order. Festivals and religious observances further reinforced superstitions. Annual cycles of planting, harvest, and worship were punctuated by rituals designed to protect communities and attract favor. Ordinary families participated actively, performing tasks that might seem odd today, leaving offerings, observing particular sequences of actions, or following symbolic rules. These practices, while often symbolic, structured social life, reinforced communal cohesion, and preserved cultural continuity across generations. Beliefs surrounding luck and fortune were widespread. Coins placed in shoes, charms tucked into clothing, or symbolic gestures like crossing fingers were common practices. These small, repeated actions formed a daily rhythm, giving ordinary people a sense of agency in an otherwise unpredictable world. Even when rooted in the intangible, these customs influenced behavior, decision-making, and social interactions. Superstitions were also intertwined with knowledge and observation. Herbal remedies, celestial patterns, and seasonal cycles often had practical effects. Even if understood symbolically, ordinary people learned to combine empirical knowledge with ritual, blending superstition and experience in ways that shaped survival strategies, health, and productivity. For instance, planting according to lunar cycles or observing animal behavior might coincide with favorable environmental conditions, creating a synergy between belief and practical benefit. The role of community cannot be understated. Superstitions were shared, taught, and reinforced through family and social networks. Ordinary citizens passed down knowledge, techniques, and rituals, ensuring continuity and consistency. Participation in these practices reinforced social norms, created a sense of belonging, and provided reassurance in times of uncertainty. Even seemingly minor rituals, knocking on wood, avoiding certain actions on unlucky days, were part of a complex web of social and cultural reinforcement. And yet, one question lingers: how much of our modern sense of precaution, habit, or routine originates from these historical superstitions? How many behaviors that now feel instinctive were once deeply entwined with belief, ritual, and the effort to navigate uncertainty? Exploring these practices reminds us that history is not only about grand events or rulers, but about the ordinary lives, daily routines, and quiet rituals that help people endure, adapt, and find comfort in an unpredictable world. As we delve further into historical superstitions, it becomes evident that these beliefs were not uniform. They varied by region, social class, and occupation. Ordinary people adopted rituals and customs suited to their environment, livelihoods, and cultural context. From rural villages to bustling cities, these practices provided structure, reassurance, and at times subtle guidance for daily life. In rural Europe, agricultural superstitions dominated daily routines. Farmers carefully observed natural signs, linking weather patterns, animal behavior, and seasonal changes to omens of success or failure. For example, the crowing of a rooster at dawn might be interpreted as a favorable sign for planting, while the unusual behavior of livestock could indicate a coming storm. Rituals accompanied these observations. Farmers might circle fields with offerings, sprinkle water or salt, or recite incantations to ensure a good harvest. These practices combined empirical observation with symbolic acts, creating a rhythm of life that grounded ordinary citizens in both nature and community. In urban areas, superstitions adapted to the rhythms of city life. Merchants and tradespeople relied on protective charms, amulets, and symbolic actions to safeguard their shops and goods. Hanging specific talismans above doorways, keeping certain objects in cash boxes, or performing small rituals before market days were common practices. Ordinary citizens internalized these customs, viewing them as practical measures intertwined with cultural tradition rather than mere superstition. Even small gestures, like knocking on wood to prevent bad luck, served as a daily rhythm and psychological reassurance. Health and medicine were deeply influenced by belief systems. Before the advent of modern medicine, Ordinary people relied on remedies grounded in tradition, ritual, and superstition. For instance, carrying a charm containing herbs believed to repel disease, or reciting incantations during illness was common across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. These practices often complemented practical approaches, such as applying poultices, boiling water, or adhering to dietary advice, illustrating the blend of observation and symbolic thinking that shaped everyday health management. In Japan, superstition shaped both personal behavior and social norms. Ordinary citizens observed rituals to ensure good fortune, ward off misfortune, or honor spiritual forces. Seasonal festivals were intertwined with specific practices, offerings of food, symbolic gestures, and recitations that connected communities to both local deities and agricultural cycles. While these customs may seem quaint today, they structured social life, providing a sense of stability, predictability, and shared purpose. Sailors and travelers worldwide developed superstitions tailored to the uncertainty of journeys. Maritime cultures were particularly rich in ritual, tying knots in ropes in specific ways, avoiding certain colors on clothing, or carrying charms to protect against storms. Ordinary sailors followed these customs diligently, believing that adherence could make the difference between safety and disaster. Even when rooted in symbolic thinking, these practices encouraged attentiveness, preparation, and cohesion among crew members, subtly improving survival odds. Children were not exempt from these traditions. From birth, ordinary families introduced young members to rituals intended to protect health, ensure fortune, and teach moral behavior. Hanging protective charms above cradles, reciting blessings, and observing seasonal taboos were common practices. Through these rituals, children learned about both cultural norms and practical observation, blending superstition with lessons about caution, care, and environmental awareness. Superstitions were also closely tied to everyday objects and architecture. Certain numbers, shapes, or placements were believed to bring luck or prevent harm. Staircases, doorways, and household objects were arranged according to symbolic reasoning, some based on inherited tradition, others on practical trial and error. Ordinary citizens, by adhering to these customs, maintained a sense of control and continuity in their domestic environments. Even festivals and holidays reinforced these beliefs. Special foods, costumes, and rituals served both social and protective functions. Ordinary households engaged in preparations that were often labor-intensive, blending spiritual observance with community bonding. Seasonal practices, such as celebrating solstices, harvest festivals, or religious holy days, embedded superstitions into the social and cultural calendar, structuring life in ways that were subtle yet deeply influential. Through these regional variations, a broader pattern emerges. Superstition was not merely a rational belief, but an adaptive, culturally mediated framework. Ordinary people used these practices to navigate uncertainty, manage risk, and structure daily life. The combination of ritual, observation, and habit created a sense of agency and continuity that allowed communities to endure challenges, whether environmental, social, or personal. And as we reflect on these practices, one question arises: how many of the small, habitual behaviors we take for granted today, knocking on wood, avoiding certain patterns, following particular routines, trace their origins to these centuries-old superstitions? How deeply are ordinary acts of caution, rhythm, and ritual embedded in human history, quietly shaping the way we live and perceive the world around us? The study of historical superstitions invites us to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, recognizing the ingenuity and resilience of people seeking order in an unpredictable world. The influence of historical superstitions extends far beyond the rituals themselves. While many practices may seem quaint or outdated today, they left a lasting imprint on culture, behavior, and social structures. Ordinary people, through daily adherence to superstitions, shape norms, traditions, and even community cohesion in ways that continue to echo across time. In households, superstitions dictated small but meaningful routines. Objects like horseshoes above doorways, salt sprinkled to ward off misfortune, or charms tucked into clothing were not mere decoration. They were tools for psychological reassurance. The act of performing these rituals provided comfort, instilled discipline, and created a rhythm to daily life. Ordinary citizens, by engaging in these practices, reinforced cultural continuity, embedding centuries of accumulated wisdom, whether symbolic, practical, or both, into the fabric of everyday life. Social life, too, was influenced by belief. Festivals, communal gatherings, and local customs often incorporated superstition, structuring interactions and expectations. Ordinary people performed specific tasks during holidays, leaving offerings, avoiding certain foods, or observing taboos, which connected individual households to larger community rituals. This integration of superstition into social life reinforced bonds, transmitted knowledge, and provided a shared framework for interpreting the world. Even minor gestures, like touching wood or carrying lucky tokens, became part of a broader cultural narrative. Occupational practices were also shaped by superstition. Farmers, sailors, artisans, and merchants relied on rituals to ensure safety, success, and prosperity. Ordinary laborers incorporated these beliefs into their routines, often blending them with practical skills and empirical observation. A sailor might check the wind while reciting a protective incantation. A farmer might observe the sky while performing symbolic gestures in the field. These practices, while culturally mediated, contributed to attentiveness, preparation, and a sense of control in uncertain circumstances. Belief systems influenced health and medicine too. Herbs, charms, and ritualized actions often coexisted with empirical remedies. Ordinary people navigated illness through a combination of superstition and practical care, observing patterns, maintaining hygiene, and performing symbolic gestures. Even if modern science dismisses the supernatural aspects, these practices illustrate human ingenuity, a combination of observation, experimentation, and culturally embedded behavior designed to optimize survival and well-being. Regional variations in superstition created a rich tapestry of human culture. What was considered lucky in one area might be taboo in another, reflecting environmental conditions, historical events, or local beliefs. Ordinary people internalized these norms, learning through observation and participation. Such differences highlight how culture shapes perception, behavior, and community identity, with superstition serving as both guide and symbol in everyday life. Education and socialization were deeply influenced by these practices. Children were taught rituals from birth, integrating superstition into moral instruction, household management, and social conduct. Through ordinary acts, reciting protective phrases, observing taboos, or performing seasonal tasks, children absorbed lessons about caution, respect, and communal responsibility. These small routines contributed to both personal development and cultural continuity, demonstrating that superstition was intertwined with learning and social cohesion. Superstitions also shaped psychology. The rituals provided a sense of agency in an unpredictable world. Ordinary people, facing uncertainties of weather, illness, or social instability, could exert influence through symbolic action. The calming effect of routine and belief reduced anxiety, reinforced resilience, and provided a framework for interpreting events beyond one's control. In this way, superstition was both practical and psychological, influencing behavior and perception in profound yet subtle ways. Modern echoes of these practices are everywhere. From knocking on wood to carrying lucky charms, many ordinary behaviors trace their origins to historical superstitions. Even cultural attitudes, caution, ritual, and attentiveness to routine, are shaped by centuries of inherited beliefs. Ordinary acts of precaution or habit, often taken for granted, carry the weight of history, reflecting human creativity, adaptation, and the need for control. Reflecting on these practices, one realizes that superstition is not merely about irrational belief, but about human resilience, ingenuity, and social cohesion. Ordinary people, through repeated rituals and observances, maintained continuity, reinforced culture, and navigated an unpredictable world with subtle skill. While the exact beliefs may have faded, the structures they created, in domestic life, community interaction, and daily routine, persist, quietly shaping behavior and culture. As we conclude this exploration, a lingering question emerges: how much of our everyday caution, habit, and attention to routine originates from these centuries-old practices? How many of our subconscious rituals, gestures for luck, routines for safety, or repetitive habits, are echoes of the superstitions that structured the lives of ordinary people across history? By studying these practices, we not only understand the past, but also gain insight into the ways ordinary human ingenuity, adaptation, and resilience continue to influence our daily lives. Human history is filled with inventions that quietly reshape daily life, even if they rarely make it into history textbooks. Ordinary people, driven by necessity and curiosity, developed tools and techniques that increased efficiency, comfort, and survival. Some inventions were simple yet profound: the lever, the pulley, or the hand mill. Others were more specialized, addressing specific challenges in cooking, cleaning, or construction. These early innovations highlight the ingenuity embedded in everyday life and the overlooked contributions of ordinary individuals. Take, for example, the invention of the spinning wheel. Introduced in India and later spreading across Europe, this device revolutionized textile production. Previously, spinning thread by hand was a slow and labor-intensive process. The spinning wheel allowed ordinary households to produce yarn more efficiently, supporting not only domestic needs, but also local economies. Women, often the primary operators, mastered these machines, combining skill, rhythm, and patience to meet household and community demands. Though simple in design, the spinning wheel quietly transformed both labor and leisure, giving people more time for other activities while fostering creativity and craftsmanship. In the realm of food preparation, countless innovations emerged to ease the burdens of daily life. Mortars and pestles, bread molds, early ovens, and fermentation vessels reflect a sophisticated understanding of material properties and process management. Ordinary cooks relied on these tools to prepare meals, preserve ingredients, and maintain household efficiency. Even minor improvements, such as a more durable bread mold or a more stable cooking vessel, had significant effects on nutrition, labor, and health. These inventions exemplify the practical genius embedded in the routines of everyday people. Water management was another area where innovation quietly transformed life. Wells, aqueducts, and primitive pumps allowed communities to access and distribute water efficiently. Ordinary laborers maintained these systems, ensuring continuity and functionality. The practical knowledge required to operate, repair, and optimize these systems reflects a deep understanding of both environment and technology. What may seem mundane, the construction of a well or the flow of water through a simple aqueduct, had profound consequences for public health, agriculture, and social organization. Some inventions were designed specifically to reduce repetitive labor. Early looms, grain threshers, and animal-driven mills exemplify this principle. Ordinary workers operating these devices increased productivity while conserving energy, allowing communities to sustain larger populations and engage in cultural pursuits beyond mere survival. These innovations, though lacking the spectacle of monumental inventions, demonstrate how small technological advances shape the rhythm of life and the trajectory of societies. Household innovations were no less remarkable. Devices for heating, lighting, and food storage reflect careful attention to comfort and practicality. Clay stoves, insulated containers, and oil lamps allowed ordinary people to extend the usability of resources and improve quality of life. Even seemingly minor improvements, a more efficient stove or a safer lamp, reduced risks, saved time, and provided a subtle but persistent influence on daily routines. Inventions also responded to environmental challenges. Irrigation systems, terraced fields, and rainwater collection devices allowed communities to adapt to climate variability and scarce resources. Ordinary farmers combined observation, experimentation, and inherited knowledge to optimize these systems. The labor involved was often tedious, yet these inventions were essential for sustaining populations and ensuring food security. The ingenuity lies not only in the tools themselves, but in the ongoing human effort to maintain and adapt them over time. Communication and record keeping saw early innovations that structured social and administrative life. Simple tools, wax tablets, quills, early printing presses, allowed ordinary citizens to participate in economic, social, and legal processes more efficiently. These inventions democratized information to a small extent, enabling knowledge transfer, literacy, and the coordination of complex activities within communities. Even modest advances in these areas created ripple effects, shaping governance, commerce, and culture. The quiet genius of forgotten inventions often lies in their everyday utility. Unlike monumental machines or groundbreaking discoveries, these tools rarely gained fame, yet their cumulative impact was enormous, enabling ordinary life to function more smoothly and predictably. The labor, skill, and creativity required to develop and operate these innovations remind us that human history is sustained not only by extraordinary individuals, but by the ordinary ingenuity embedded in daily practice. Reflecting on these forgotten inventions, one might ask how many modern conveniences trace their origins to these modest innovations. How much of our present-day ease and efficiency depends on tools and techniques created, refined, and maintained by ordinary people centuries ago? In exploring the overlooked ingenuity of historical inventions, we see that even mundane tools carry profound significance, quietly shaping human life and culture across generations. As we delve deeper into historical inventions, it becomes clear that the ordinary people who created and used them often had an extraordinary impact on daily life. Many innovations emerged from necessity, addressing labor, resource scarcity, or environmental challenges. From household gadgets to community-wide systems, these inventions shaped work, comfort and survival, quietly influencing society in ways that persist even today. Consider the hand-operated grain mill, a device that transformed the lives of rural households across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Grinding grain by hand was slow, exhausting, and inefficient. The mill allowed ordinary families to process larger quantities of flour more consistently. Children and women, often responsible for these tasks, relied on technique, timing, and endurance to operate these devices effectively. Beyond improving efficiency, the mill helped communities survive seasonal shortages, sustain larger populations, and diversify diets. It is a perfect example of how a seemingly modest tool had a significant social impact. Cooking and food preparation were fertile grounds for invention. Early ovens, improved cookware, and preservation vessels allowed households to maximize resources and reduce spoilage. In ancient Rome, portable bread ovens and specialized pottery enabled both domestic and commercial baking, reflecting the ingenuity of ordinary bakers. In Asia, fermentation jars for soy, rice, and vegetables optimized nutrition while extending shelf life. These inventions illustrate that innovation was not only about novelty, but about practical problem solving in everyday life. Water and sanitation innovations had equally profound effects. Wells, cisterns, aqueducts, and simple pumps allowed communities to secure clean water, maintain hygiene, and support agriculture. Ordinary workers who dug, maintained, and operated these systems ensured that daily life could continue with minimal disruption. Even the construction of modest water channels required knowledge of terrain, material properties, and community cooperation. These innovations exemplify how everyday technology shapes survival, health, and social cohesion. Textile production also saw transformative inventions. Beyond the spinning wheel, early looms and weaving techniques allowed communities to produce clothing more efficiently. Ordinary artisans, through repetitive labor and skill, created garments that were both functional and aesthetically significant. These innovations supported trade, local economies, and cultural expression. Even small adjustments, a better tension mechanism, a more durable shuttle, or a faster loom, had far-reaching effects on labor distribution and productivity. In medicine, ordinary ingenuity led to simple yet effective devices. Tools for preparing herbal remedies, measuring dosages, or supporting patient care improved outcomes and reduced effort. While rudimentary compared to modern medical equipment, these inventions were life-saving in context. Ordinary people, from apothecaries to household caregivers, mastered these tools and techniques, illustrating that innovation often emerges in response to pressing human needs rather than the pursuit of fame or profit. Even in transportation, overlooked inventions quietly shaped society. Wheeled carts, improved saddles, and basic harness systems allowed communities to move goods and people more efficiently. Ordinary laborers and craftsmen designed, maintained, and operated these systems, enhancing trade, communication, and survival. The cumulative effect of such inventions was profound, enabling more complex societies and broader cultural interaction. Trade and marketplaces encouraged further innovation. Ordinary merchants developed scales, measuring containers, and storage solutions to manage goods effectively. These inventions were often simple yet ingenious, ensuring fairness, consistency, and efficiency in commerce. By facilitating trade, they also enabled cultural exchange, bringing new ideas, materials, and techniques into everyday life. Even recreational and leisure activities benefited from inventive minds. Games, musical instruments, and simple sporting devices required clever construction and thoughtful design. Ordinary people, whether craftsmen, players, or spectators, engaged with these tools, demonstrating that invention is not solely utilitarian but also cultural. These creations contributed to social bonding, cultural identity, and shared enjoyment, all essential aspects of human experience. The legacy of forgotten inventions is both practical and symbolic. Each device, tool, or technique reflects human creativity, problem-solving, and adaptation. Ordinary people, often unnoticed in historical records, quietly shape the trajectory of societies through innovation embedded in daily routines. From mills to ovens, water systems to textile tools, these inventions reveal the profound impact of small, persistent ingenuity over time. And yet a question arises: how many of the conveniences we take for granted today from kitchen appliances to water systems, trace their origins to these overlooked inventions. How much of modern comfort depends on the centuries of experimentation, adaptation, and ordinary labor that preceded us? By examining the humble origins of these forgotten innovations, we gain a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity embedded in everyday life and the quiet persistence of human creativity across generations. The inventions we often overlook had effects that rippled far beyond their immediate purpose. While some may seem mundane, their cumulative impact on daily life, labor, culture, and community cohesion was profound. Ordinary people, through consistent use, maintenance, and innovation, ensured that these tools and techniques not only survived but shaped societal development for generations. Take, for example, the hand-operated spinning wheel. While simple in concept, it revolutionized textile production and allowed ordinary households to participate in local economies. Women and young apprentices spent hours mastering the rhythm of spinning, coordinating hands and feet in a precise, almost meditative motion. Their labor was not just about efficiency, it fostered patience, discipline, and skill that were passed down through generations. The spinning wheel quietly influenced local economies, clothing production, and even trade networks, demonstrating that ordinary ingenuity could have extraordinary societal impact. Food preparation and preservation also benefited from these forgotten innovations. Mortars, pestles, fermentation jars, and primitive ovens allowed households to manage scarce resources effectively. Families learned to balance flavor, nutrition, and storage, often through trial and error. Ordinary cooks developed routines that minimized waste and maximized efficiency, reflecting both creativity and resilience. These practices enabled communities to endure harsh winters, food shortages, or long-distance travel, embedding ingenuity into the very act of sustaining life. Water and sanitation inventions had a similarly enduring impact. Wells, aqueducts, and pumps, often maintained by ordinary laborers, allowed communities to survive in challenging environments. Access to clean water improved health, reduced disease, and enabled agricultural productivity. Even seemingly minor innovations, a more durable water channel or a hand-operated pump, improved quality of life and social stability. These technologies illustrate that ordinary labor and ingenuity were essential for long-term community survival and prosperity. Textile production, too, left a lasting legacy. Early looms, weaving techniques, and cloth treatments allowed ordinary artisans to create clothing that met functional and aesthetic needs. Communities became more resilient, with consistent clothing production supporting trade, social status, and cultural identity. The labor of ordinary people operating these devices ensured that knowledge, skill, and efficiency were transmitted across generations, reinforcing cultural continuity. Transportation-related inventions also shaped societies in profound ways. Wheeled carts, harnesses, and simple vehicles enabled the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Ordinary craftsmen maintained and repaired these tools, ensuring that trade, communication, and agriculture could proceed reliably. Even simple innovations like reinforced wheels or improved yokes had far-reaching effects, linking communities and facilitating the exchange of resources, knowledge, and culture. Communication and record-keeping were transformed by modest inventions as well. Wax tablets, quills, simple presses, and early codices enabled ordinary people to document transactions, ideas, and stories. This allowed for more coordinated social and economic activity, improved governance, and cultural continuity. Even rudimentary literacy tools empowered communities to organize labor, share information, and preserve knowledge. Ordinary people, by using and refining these inventions, became active participants in shaping history. Trade and market innovations also underscore the importance of ordinary ingenuity. Scales, measuring containers, and storage solutions allowed merchants to manage goods efficiently and fairly. By facilitating commerce, these tools indirectly influenced the spread of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Ordinary traders and craftsmen, through consistent use of these devices, helped create economic systems that sustained cities, towns, and regions. Even recreational inventions had social and cultural significance. Simple games, musical instruments, and sporting devices enriched daily life and provided opportunities for community interaction. Ordinary participants, whether players, craftsmen, or spectators, contributed to cultural continuity and social cohesion. These seemingly minor creations remind us that innovation was not solely about survival, it also enhanced quality of life, creativity, and connection. The long-term influence of these inventions lies in their integration into the routines of daily life. Each tool, device, or technique carried embedded knowledge, cultural values, and practical lessons. Ordinary people, through repetitive use and refinement, preserved and adapted these inventions, ensuring that human ingenuity was sustained across generations. Even inventions that appear modest today were foundational to survival, comfort, and societal development in their own time. Ultimately, forgotten inventions demonstrate that history is built not only by extraordinary individuals, but by the ordinary ingenuity of everyday life. The cumulative effect of countless small innovations shaped labor, culture, survival strategies, and social cohesion. Ordinary people, bakers, farmers, artisans, laborers, and caregivers, quietly influenced the course of history through practical creativity, perseverance, and adaptation. As we reflect on these innovations, a final thought arises: how many modern conveniences, comforts, or even cultural practices trace their origins to these overlooked inventions? How much of what we now consider ordinary in our daily lives is rooted in centuries of ingenuity, persistence, and quiet labor by people whose names are lost to time? By appreciating the forgotten inventions of history, we gain insight into human resilience, creativity, and the profound impact of ordinary life on the course of civilization. Life in ancient cities was both bustling and regimented. Streets were narrow, often unpaved, winding through neighborhoods filled with homes, workshops, and public spaces. Ordinary citizens navigated these streets on foot, with animals, or in simple carts, moving between work, markets, and domestic duties. The sounds, smells, and rhythms of daily life created a sensory tapestry, each moment structured by both necessity and social norms. Homes varied widely depending on social class and occupation. Ordinary families often lived in multi-room dwellings with simple furnishings, while wealthier citizens maintained larger houses with courtyards, gardens, and storage rooms. Even within modest homes, organization and routine were essential. Families coordinated cooking, cleaning, childcare, and craftwork, ensuring that essential tasks were completed efficiently. Kitchens were central to domestic life, often integrated with living spaces and equipped with simple ovens, storage containers, and cooking tools. The act of preparing meals required skill, patience, and attention to detail, reflecting both survival and social custom. Markets were the lifeblood of urban communities. Stall owners sold grains, fruits, vegetables, spices, textiles, and tools. Ordinary people interacted daily with merchants, negotiating prices, observing quality, and exchanging information. These exchanges were not only economic but also social, fostering connections, spreading news, and reinforcing cultural norms. Markets were lively, noisy, and sometimes chaotic, yet they provided structure and predictability in urban life. The organization of space, timing of sales, and seasonal rhythms shaped both work and leisure, creating a sense of community cohesion. Public spaces, temples, and forums provided additional structure to daily life. Citizens participated in religious rituals, civic events, and social gatherings, often blending practical concerns with spiritual and communal activities. Ordinary people engaged with these spaces through routine visits, contributions, or attendance at festivals. These interactions reinforced social norms, transmitted knowledge, and integrated individual lives into a broader civic framework. Even small gestures, such as offering coins or observing ceremonial practices, connected ordinary citizens to the rhythms of city life and the legacy of tradition. Sanitation and water management were vital in densely populated areas. Wells, public fountains, and drainage systems allowed communities to access clean water and dispose of waste. Ordinary residents were responsible for maintaining cleanliness in homes, streets, and communal spaces. Though primitive by modern standards, these systems reflected a sophisticated understanding of public health and community coordination. Their effectiveness depended on collective effort, highlighting the importance of ordinary labor in sustaining urban life. Work in ancient cities was varied and structured by social hierarchy, skill, and necessity. Craftsmen, bakers, weavers, and laborers contributed to essential services that supported both survival and cultural life. Daily routines involved repetitive yet skilled tasks, from kneading dough and weaving textiles to constructing buildings and maintaining infrastructure. Ordinary workers balanced efficiency with quality, learning techniques through apprenticeship, observation, and practice. The cumulative effect of these efforts maintained the functionality and vibrancy of urban centers, demonstrating how ordinary labor sustained both economy and culture. Social interactions were structured by proximity, occupation, and family networks. Neighborhoods often formed tight, knit communities where ordinary citizens knew one another and collaborated on common tasks. Children learned skills, social norms, and community knowledge through observation and participation. Even mundane interactions, exchanging greetings, sharing tools, or helping with labor, reinforced cohesion and mutual reliance. Daily life was structured yet dynamic, balancing necessity with opportunity, labor with leisure, and survival with social engagement. Religious and ritual practices punctuated ordinary routines. Offerings at household shrines, participation in festivals, and attendance at public ceremonies integrated spiritual life into daily existence. Ordinary people adhered to symbolic acts, whether leaving food for deities, observing holy days, or reciting prayers for protection and prosperity. These rituals provided structure, meaning, and continuity, linking individuals to the past, their community, and shared cultural heritage. Even leisure was woven into daily rhythms. Music, storytelling, games, and communal gatherings offered respite from labor and structured social interaction. Ordinary citizens found enjoyment and creative expression in small, routine practices, contributing to cultural transmission and community identity. Leisure was not frivolous, it reinforced social cohesion, transmitted knowledge, and created opportunities for reflection and bonding. Reflecting on these routines, one realizes that daily life in ancient cities was a delicate balance of labor, social interaction, and cultural practice. Ordinary people shaped the urban landscape through repeated tasks, coordinated effort, and adherence to both practical and symbolic norms. Every loaf of bread, woven textile, and market transaction contributed to the functioning, continuity, and vibrancy of the city. And as we consider these ordinary lives, a lingering question arises: how many aspects of modern urban life, routines, occupations, social interactions, and even leisure activities, are inherited from the rhythms, practices, and ingenuity of ordinary people in ancient cities? The story of daily urban life reminds us that history is built not only by monumental events, but also by the persistent, often unnoticed labor and creativity of countless individuals. The heartbeat of ancient cities was found in trade, family structures, and communal celebrations. Ordinary people wove these elements together to create rhythm, stability, and meaning in urban life. While streets were busy with commerce, homes, markets, and public spaces formed interconnected spheres where survival, social identity, and culture intertwined. Trade was not just economic, it was a social and cultural engine. Marketplaces served as hubs where ordinary citizens purchased goods, exchanged ideas, and encountered travelers from distant regions. Merchants sold textiles, pottery, spices, and everyday necessities, each transaction guided by both custom and negotiation. Small innovations, such as standardized weights or measuring containers, made trade efficient and reliable. Ordinary participants learned patterns of supply, demand, and quality assessment, forming a practical education in commerce through daily experience. Neighborhood artisans contributed to trade through craft and labor. Bakers produced bread in community ovens, potters shaped clay vessels for households, and blacksmiths forged tools and household items. These skilled individuals balanced routine and precision, maintaining standards across the community. Apprentices observed, practiced, and mastered techniques over years, ensuring the transmission of knowledge and skill across generations. Even the humblest craft reflected ingenuity, persistence, and dedication, shaping urban life in profound ways. Family life in ancient cities was structured yet dynamic. Households were centers of labor, education, and cultural transmission. Parents guided children through daily routines, domestic chores, and practical skills essential for survival. Mealtimes, communal tasks, and household rituals reinforced hierarchy, responsibility, and cohesion. Ordinary families maintained traditions, observed religious practices, and participated in community events, creating continuity between past and present, private and public life. Festivals and religious ceremonies punctuated daily routines with rhythm, color, and communal engagement. Ordinary citizens participated actively, attending public rituals, making offerings, and observing seasonal customs. These events reinforced social bonds and cultural identity. Even seemingly minor actions, leaving small offerings, wearing specific colors, or observing local taboos, tied individuals to a collective narrative. Festivals also created opportunities for entertainment, trade, and social mobility, allowing citizens to interact beyond their immediate neighborhoods. Markets and festivals often overlapped. Temporary stalls sold goods, food, and trinkets during celebrations, creating a lively environment of trade and social interaction. Ordinary citizens navigated these spaces, negotiating prices, sharing stories, and exchanging cultural knowledge. Children and apprentices observed and participated, learning both economic skills and social etiquette. The combined effect of trade, family, and celebration created a structured yet vibrant urban ecosystem, where daily life, culture, and economy were deeply intertwined. Religious practices were integrated into household and community life. Ordinary people observed rituals at home shrines, participated in public ceremonies, and adhered to symbolic practices tied to fertility, health, and fortune. These practices provided continuity, reinforced social norms, and gave meaning to everyday labor. For instance, preparing offerings, observing fasts, or attending temple ceremonies connected individuals to both divine favor and communal identity. Through these routines, ordinary citizens maintained cultural memory and social cohesion. Education, often informal, occurred through observation and participation. Children learned crafts, household management, social norms, and moral conduct by watching elders and joining in communal tasks. Ordinary citizens transmitted practical knowledge alongside cultural values, ensuring that each generation understood both survival and tradition. This process of informal learning highlights the centrality of ordinary life in sustaining urban culture and history. Leisure and entertainment were also woven into daily rhythms. Storytelling, music, games, and performance provided respite from labor while reinforcing shared cultural identity. Ordinary citizens enjoyed and maintained these practices, often improvising or adapting them to local circumstances. These activities strengthened community bonds, created a shared sense of joy, and offered opportunities for reflection and creativity. Even mundane amusement carried cultural significance, illustrating the holistic nature of urban life. As we consider the interplay of trade, family, festivals, and leisure, it becomes clear that ordinary people were the architects of urban culture. Daily routine skills and social interactions sustained both survival and identity. Each loaf of bread, each festival offering, and each handcrafted item reflected human ingenuity, adaptation, and communal effort. These routines may appear ordinary, but they reveal the extraordinary capacity of individuals to structure life, maintain continuity, and contribute to the broader tapestry of urban society. A question lingers: how much of modern urban living, our routines, markets, and family-centered social structures, can trace its origins back to these ordinary practices in ancient cities? By examining the day-to-day experiences of ordinary citizens, we uncover the quiet ingenuity and resilience that allowed complex urban societies to thrive. As we conclude our journey through daily life in ancient cities, it becomes clear that ordinary people were the architects of urban culture. Their routines, skills, and social interactions created continuity, stability, and resilience in communities that faced environmental, economic, and political challenges. Even the most mundane aspects of life, cooking, cleaning, trade, and rituals, contributed to the functioning and evolution of cities over centuries. One of the most striking elements of urban life was how ordinary people maintained social cohesion through routine. Neighborhoods functioned as small, interdependent communities. Families knew one another, shared resources, and coordinated labor. Children observed and participated in household and communal tasks, absorbing practical skills, social norms, and cultural knowledge. Ordinary citizens were simultaneously workers, learners, and cultural transmitters, ensuring that knowledge and tradition endured across generations. Markets remained central to this urban ecosystem. Beyond commerce, they were sites of socialization, information exchange, and cultural integration. Merchants, artisans, and buyers created dynamic networks of interaction that transcended class and occupation. Ordinary marketgoers learned negotiation, quality assessment, and timing, cultivating skills essential for survival and success. Seasonal festivals further enhanced these networks, blending trade, entertainment, and ritual into a cohesive cultural experience. Religious and ritual practices reinforced social order and identity. Household shrines, public temples, and communal ceremonies connected individuals to shared belief systems. Ordinary citizens participated through offerings, prayers, and symbolic gestures, embedding spiritual awareness into daily life. These practices provided reassurance, structured routines, and moral guidance, creating a sense of continuity even amid social or environmental uncertainty. Occupational specialization shaped urban resilience. Bakers, weavers, metalworkers, and other artisans maintained production systems that supported both survival and cultural life. Apprentices learned through repetition, observation, and mentorship, ensuring the transmission of skills and knowledge. These labor routines, while repetitive, fostered discipline, precision, and creativity. The collective work of ordinary citizens allowed cities to function efficiently, even during crisis or population growth. Family life and domestic routines were equally vital. Meals, household chores, childcare, and domestic rituals provided structure to daily schedules. Ordinary households balanced survival, productivity, and social cohesion, weaving together work, education, and cultural practice. These routines were not arbitrary. They were essential for maintaining order, transmitting knowledge, and reinforcing social norms. Through ordinary effort, families became the foundation of community stability and cultural continuity. Even leisure and recreation played a critical role in urban life. Music, storytelling, games, and communal gatherings offered respite from labor while reinforcing identity, creativity, and social bonds. Ordinary citizens adapted these activities to local circumstances, blending entertainment with education, cultural transmission, and social cohesion. These practices demonstrate that leisure, often dismissed as trivial, was central to the resilience and vibrancy of ancient cities. Infrastructure, sanitation, and public works reflected the ingenuity and organization of ordinary people. Wells, public fountains, roads, and drainage systems required maintenance, repair, and careful operation. Ordinary laborers, through daily effort, ensured that these systems functioned reliably, supporting health, commerce, and urban growth. Even minor improvements or adaptations had significant consequences for community well-being, illustrating the importance of practical knowledge and sustained effort. The cumulative impact of ordinary life in ancient cities extended beyond immediate survival. Through consistent labor, cultural participation, and adherence to routines, ordinary citizens shaped urban identity, economic stability, and social cohesion. Streets, homes, markets, and public spaces were not just physical structures, they were living systems maintained by human ingenuity, collaboration, and persistence. Reflecting on these patterns, one realizes that modern urban life, with its routines, marketplaces, family networks, and leisure activities, owes much to the practices established by ordinary citizens in ancient cities. Even the smallest gestures, repeated over generations, contributed to continuity, resilience, and cultural richness. The story of daily life reminds us that history is not solely composed of extraordinary events or famous individuals, but also of the persistent, quiet efforts of countless people whose daily labor, rituals, and interactions built the foundations of society. And as we drift to the close of this exploration, we are left with a lingering thought: how much of our modern urban existence, our routines, commerce, cultural practices, and domestic structures, can trace its roots back to the ordinary lives of people in ancient cities. Their quiet ingenuity, resilience, and attention to routine continue to shape the world we inhabit today, proving that the ordinary can be extraordinary when viewed through the lens of history. History is full of laws and regulations that might seem absurd by modern standards, yet they served specific purposes within their societies. Ordinary citizens had to navigate these rules carefully, often balancing practicality with compliance. Some laws were designed to maintain social order, others to protect public health, and still others reflected cultural or religious values. In medieval England, for example, sumptuary laws dictated what people could wear, depending on their social class. Ordinary citizens could not simply purchase luxurious fabrics or adornments without permission, and penalties could include fines or public humiliation. These laws aimed to maintain the social hierarchy and prevent challenges to status, ensuring that outward appearances reflected societal roles. While the rules might appear trivial today, they influenced clothing choices, household economies, and social interactions for ordinary families. Similarly, in ancient Rome, regulations governed food, trade, and public behavior. Ordinary citizens navigated rules about the sale of bread, the timing of markets, and even restrictions on public gatherings. Certain foods were prohibited during festivals, and merchants faced strict standards for measuring goods. These laws helped regulate commerce, prevent fraud, and maintain civic order. Ordinary people adapted to these rules through routine, observation, and adherence to custom, integrating legal expectations into daily life. In Asia, imperial courts often issued bizarre decrees. In some Chinese dynasties, regulations dictated proper seating arrangements, ceremonial gestures, and even hairstyles in public spaces. Ordinary citizens and officials alike needed to understand and follow these rules precisely to avoid penalties or loss of favor. While these laws might seem peculiar, they reinforced cultural norms, hierarchy, and respect for authority. Daily life required attention to both written and unwritten expectations, shaping behavior and social awareness. Trade-related laws also produced unusual outcomes. In Venice, strict regulations controlled the sale of salt, grain, and spices. Ordinary merchants had to comply with these laws to avoid fines, confiscation, or imprisonment. Compliance required careful bookkeeping, awareness of market schedules, and often reliance on community knowledge. These regulations, while cumbersome, helped stabilize trade, prevent shortages, and maintain civic authority. Ordinary people navigated these restrictions through experience, negotiation, and local networks. Public behavior was similarly regulated. In some European cities, citizens faced restrictions on noise, movement, or even the types of animals they could keep within city walls. Ordinary residents adjusted daily routines to comply, often using inventive methods to meet both personal needs and civic expectations. For instance, garbage disposal, street cleaning, and nighttime curfews required careful attention to time and place. These regulations influenced daily habits, household organization, and community interaction. Marriage and family life were also subject to legal oversight. Laws governed dowries, inheritance, and the legal rights of spouses and children. Ordinary families navigated complex legal frameworks to ensure social standing, property security, and continuity of lineage. While the rules were often rigid, they reflected societal priorities and provided a framework for managing personal and communal relationships. Compliance required knowledge, planning, and negotiation, emphasizing the role of ordinary citizens in upholding legal and cultural norms. Even entertainment and leisure were regulated. In some historical periods, authorities imposed rules on theater performances, public festivals, and musical events. Citizens had to follow schedules, observe seating protocols, and comply with content restrictions. Ordinary participants adapted to these rules, integrating them into routines that balanced enjoyment with compliance. These regulations not only structured communal life, but also influenced cultural production and social interaction. Punishments for breaking laws often reflected the priorities of society rather than the severity of the offense. Ordinary citizens learned to navigate these consequences, sometimes employing strategies to avoid detection or mitigate penalties. From minor fines to public shaming, enforcement shaped behavior, reinforced norms, and ensured adherence to societal expectations. As we reflect on these peculiar regulations, it becomes clear that laws, even when strange by modern standards, played a critical role in shaping ordinary life. They structured daily routines, influenced social behavior, and provided a framework for community cohesion. Ordinary people, through routine adherence, negotiation, and adaptation, maintained the functioning of society and contributed to cultural continuity. And as we conclude this section, a lingering question emerges: how many of our modern rules, restrictions, and social expectations echo the same need to regulate behavior, maintain order, and balance communal priorities? By examining historical laws and the ordinary people who navigated them, we gain insight into the delicate balance between authority, culture, and daily life. In examining history's oddest laws, it becomes apparent that these rules were far more than curiosities. They actively structured the daily lives of ordinary citizens. From the marketplace to private homes, citizens navigated an intricate web of regulations, balancing compliance with practicality. While some laws may appear whimsical or arbitrary today, they often reflected societal priorities, moral standards, and communal needs. Consider medieval Europe, where towns imposed strict laws regarding cleanliness and hygiene. Citizens could be fined for failing to sweep the streets in front of their homes, or for disposing of waste improperly. While the enforcement of these rules might have seemed tedious, they played a critical role in preventing disease, maintaining order, and ensuring public safety. Ordinary residents developed routines to meet these requirements, often incorporating neighborhood cooperation and communal vigilance to comply efficiently. In England, sumptuary laws dictated clothing based on social class, reinforcing hierarchy and limiting ostentation. Ordinary citizens needed to carefully select fabrics, adornments, and colors to avoid fines or public humiliation. Beyond enforcing social stratification, these laws influenced household economies, fashion choices, and social interactions, embedding conformity into daily routines. The seemingly trivial task of choosing an outfit thus became a reflection of civic obedience and social awareness. Trade laws often took an unusual form as well. In Venice, for example, merchants were subject to precise regulations controlling the sale and distribution of goods such as salt, grain, and spices. Weighing scales had to be calibrated according to civic standards, and prices were sometimes fixed to prevent speculation or shortages. Ordinary traders spent hours learning these regulations, meticulously measuring, recording, and adjusting their transactions to avoid penalties. Compliance required skill, patience, and social awareness, turning everyday trade into a careful balancing act between law, profit, and reputation. Even domestic life was influenced by regulatory oversight. In some cities, laws dictated the number and types of animals citizens could keep, the size of fireplaces, and the materials used in construction. Ordinary families incorporated these rules into their routines, carefully managing space, labor, and resources. Compliance often meant adopting inventive solutions, storing animals in shared spaces, adjusting cooking methods, or repurposing materials. These adaptations demonstrate how laws, no matter how peculiar, shaped the rhythm of ordinary life. Religious and ceremonial regulations also played a role. In ancient China, the imperial court issued elaborate decrees controlling behavior, clothing, and ritual participation. Ordinary citizens, from officials to farmers, were expected to follow these rules meticulously. Festivals, temple rituals, and household observances were governed by prescribed actions, timing, and offerings. While these laws might seem overly strict or strange, they integrated spiritual life into daily routines, reinforcing hierarchy, cultural identity, and social cohesion. Public behavior in streets and marketplaces was closely monitored. Citizens could face fines for excessive noise, inappropriate attire, or unpermitted gatherings. Even minor violations, such as carrying a certain type of container or walking at the wrong time, could lead to penalties. Ordinary people learned to navigate these restrictions through observation, timing, and practical ingenuity. The need to adapt to legal expectations encouraged careful planning, social awareness, and compliance, which in turn helped maintain order in densely populated areas. Marriage, inheritance, and family laws often included unusual provisions. Dowries, property transfer rules, and legal hierarchies influenced daily decisions, household dynamics, and long-term planning. Ordinary families had to navigate these complex legal frameworks, balancing economic necessity with cultural norms. Planning meals, labor distribution, and domestic tasks often reflected awareness of legal obligations, demonstrating how regulations penetrated even the most private aspects of life. Entertainment and leisure were similarly affected. In some periods, authorities regulated public performances, theater attendance, and festive activities. Citizens had to follow schedules, seating arrangements, and content restrictions, integrating law into recreation. Ordinary participants adapted routines to comply while still enjoying communal celebrations. Even casual activities like storytelling, music making, or local games were conducted within a framework of regulation, illustrating how laws structured not only work but also play. Despite their peculiarities, these laws served a purpose, maintaining social hierarchy, regulating behavior, ensuring public safety, and fostering civic cohesion. Ordinary people, by adhering to, negotiating, or creatively adapting to these rules, actively contributed to the smooth functioning of society. Their daily routines, small adjustments, and practical ingenuity sustained communal life and preserved cultural norms across generations. Reflecting on these unusual regulations, one sees that laws, no matter how odd, are more than arbitrary rules. They reveal what societies valued, feared, and sought to control. They also demonstrate the ingenuity of ordinary people in navigating, adapting to, and sometimes subtly bending these frameworks to maintain daily life, protect livelihoods, and ensure survival. And so, one wonders how many of our modern social norms, regulations, and bureaucratic practices carry echoes of these peculiar historical laws. How much of daily life is shaped not by grand ideals but by the need to comply with rules, strange, practical, or otherwise, that govern behavior and social order. Examining these laws and the ordinary citizens who lived under them provides insight into the enduring relationship between authority, culture, and daily existence. As we conclude our exploration of history's peculiar laws, it becomes evident that these regulations were more than quirky footnotes. They shaped society, influenced behavior, and reflected the priorities and fears of entire communities. Ordinary people, navigating these frameworks, became silent architects of social cohesion, cultural transmission, and practical adaptation. One of the most profound impacts of odd laws was on daily routines. Citizens integrated rules into every aspect of life, from household management to commerce and social interaction. For instance, sumptuary laws dictating clothing choices ensured that households maintained strict awareness of material resources, social expectations, and public perception. Ordinary citizens learned to plan attire, prepare for public appearances, and manage domestic resources carefully. Over time, these routines became internalized, shaping not only behavior but also cultural identity and social awareness. Market regulations, though cumbersome, promoted fairness and stability. Ordinary merchants and traders meticulously followed rules regarding weights, measures, and trade schedules. By doing so, they ensured that commerce functioned smoothly and predictably, fostering trust within the community. Even when the laws seemed absurd, adherents cultivated social skills, negotiation tactics, and practical knowledge, allowing citizens to navigate complex urban economies. The cumulative effect of such compliance contributed to economic resilience, cultural continuity, and urban stability. Laws governing family marriage and inheritance also had lasting social consequences. Dowries, property rights, and household responsibilities were strictly codified, influencing decisions about labor distribution, child rearing, and resource management. Ordinary families adapted by structuring domestic life around legal expectations, balancing individual needs with societal rules. In doing so, they reinforced both hierarchy and continuity, passing traditions and legal knowledge across generations. These seemingly mundane adaptations left an enduring imprint on social structures, demonstrating how ordinary life and law were deeply intertwined. Public behavior regulations further illustrate the long-term cultural impact of these laws. Restrictions on noise, movement, or public gatherings guided civic life and shaped communal expectations. Citizens learned to anticipate enforcement, adjust daily schedules, and negotiate compliance. The result was a culture of shared responsibility, self-discipline, and awareness of social norms. Over time, such habits embedded themselves into the collective consciousness, influencing behavior long after the original law might have faded from active enforcement. Even leisure and recreation were molded by regulation. Authorities sometimes controlled festivals, performances, and games, requiring citizens to observe rules of participation. Ordinary participants adapted by incorporating these expectations into their routines, preserving cultural practices while ensuring compliance. The long-term effect was a fusion of law, leisure, and tradition, where entertainment and civic responsibility coexisted seamlessly. Communities maintained cultural identity through repeated observance of these practices, highlighting the role of ordinary people in sustaining social cohesion. Religious and ceremonial laws had similarly enduring consequences. Citizens engaged in prescribed rituals, offerings, and observances, embedding spiritual practice into daily routines. These practices reinforced moral codes, social hierarchy, and communal identity. Ordinary participants, through routine adherence, became active agents in preserving cultural memory, transmitting values, and shaping collective behavior. In essence, even the most peculiar religious regulations contributed to the long-term cultural framework of society. Adaptation and creativity were essential for ordinary citizens navigating odd laws. Many found practical solutions to comply without undue hardship. For example, merchants devised clever accounting methods to meet trade regulations, families reorganized domestic spaces to satisfy housing codes, and neighborhood groups coordinated labor to maintain public order. These adaptive strategies illustrate human ingenuity and the ability of ordinary people to integrate legal constraints into practical routines. Over time, such adaptations became institutionalized, subtly influencing societal norms and expectations. The cumulative impact of these laws extended beyond compliance. They shaped cultural practices, informed social hierarchies, and influenced urban planning, commerce, and domestic life. Ordinary people, through adherence, negotiation, and adaptation, maintained the continuity and stability of their communities. Their daily efforts transformed legal structures from abstract rules into lived experience, embedding law into the rhythm of ordinary life. Reflecting on this, we see that even seemingly absurd or trivial regulations leave a lasting imprint on society. Modern governance, bureaucratic procedures, social expectations, and cultural habits often echo these historical laws. The ordinary citizens who navigated them laid the groundwork for contemporary practices, demonstrating that history's oddities were not irrelevant. They were foundational to the functioning and continuity of society. As we conclude, one lingering thought emerges: how many of the rules, routines, and societal norms we accept today have origins in these peculiar historical regulations. How much of our modern behavior is shaped by centuries of ordinary people adapting to laws, negotiating constraints, and creatively integrating rules into daily life? By studying these odd laws, we gain insight not only into historical governance but also into the resilience, ingenuity, and quiet influence of ordinary citizens throughout history.